Become Fearless, The Path of the Immutable Men, written and narrated by Graham Leggett. Introduction: The Call of the Immutable Men. There are two kinds of men in this world. The first kind is ruled by circumstance. He is a prisoner of his own loops, spiraling through fear, indecision, weakness, and submission. He waits for permission to act. He rationalizes his stagnation. He seeks comfort in distractions, afraid to confront the abyss inside him. He is a man already dead, though his body has not yet decayed. Then there is a second kind of man. He is an immutable man, a man who does not bow, does not break, and does not seek refuge in false comforts. He does not run from suffering. He dominates it. He does not ask for permission. He seizes his own destiny. The immutable man is not born. He is forged. This book is not here to inspire you. This book is here to test you. The men in these pages were not philosophers, not theorists, not academics. They were warriors, outlaws, survivors, and sovereign forces of will. They were men who faced death, pain, prison, and suffering, and came out stronger. Tlahuicole, who, rather than submit, chose to die in combat against waves of warriors. Louis Zamperini, who endured 47 days at sea and brutal torture as a POW, yet never surrendered his will. Peter Freuchen, who survived the Arctic by amputating his own toes and fought off a polar bear with a club. Roy Shaw, who was electroshocked to erase his mind but emerged even stronger, an unbreakable bare-knuckle fighter. And Charles Bronson, who spent decades in solitary confinement but never surrendered to the system. These men are not men of theory. These are men of fire and steel who refuse to be owned by any system, any captor, or any force in this world. The lessons of their lives are here for you, but they are not gifts. They are weapons. You do not read this book. You survive it and forge yourself by it. You will be tested. If you want to be entertained, put this book down now. If you want to feel motivated for a week, burn this book. This is not here to make you feel good. This book is here to destroy the weak parts of you. This book is a challenging. This book is a reckoning. Each chapter will test your mind. You will be given not just knowledge, but trials, praxis that will force you to embody resilience. You will face solitude like Bronson, locked in a room with your own mind, no distractions, no escape. You will fast like a warrior, severing your attachments to hunger and weakness. You will face the cold like Freuchen, standing in the freezing air to prove your mind is greater than your body. These experiments in suffering are not optional. They are your initiation to the immutable man's mindset. This book is not here to be read. This book is here to transform you. The Immutable Audit, your weapon against recursion hell. If you do not take dominion over your own mind, something else will. There is no neutrality in this war. Either you own your suffering or your suffering owns you. This is why the Immutable Audit exists. It is the ultimate war against unconscious recursion, ensuring that you never again become a prisoner of your own loops. You will audit your own weaknesses, expose them, and destroy them. You will preempt suffering before it takes hold. You will wield your past suffering as a weapon, not a wound. Each day, you will confront yourself, not as a victim, but as a sovereign warrior. Each day, you will choose defiance, not as rebellion, but as an act of self-mastery. Each day, you will cement your dominion over mind, body, and suffering. By the end of this book, if you have not transformed, you will know why. Because you chose to remain weak, and that will be on you. Final warning, if you continue, there is no turning back. This book will change you, but only if you are willing to be changed. If you continue reading, you are making a pact with yourself, a contract of fire and blood that says, you will not turn away from suffering, you will master it. You will not kneel to fear, You will forge it into courage. And you will not seek comfort. You will seek dominion over yourself. If you are ready, turn the page. If you are not, put this book down. This is not for everyone, and that is exactly the point. To become immutable is to forge yourself on every level, not just in thought, not just in action, but in the very wiring of your biology. Resilience is not just a mindset, it is a physical state, a biochemical fortress that must be hardened through deliberate, calculated stress. You are about to learn not just how to think like these men, but how to biologically reprogram yourself for unshakable resilience. Your nervous system will literally adapt. Your body will be reforged. Your endurance will be cultivated at the cellular level. You are about to begin a transformation that leaves no part of you unchanged: mind, will, and flesh. Welcome to the next stage of your evolution. Biological fortification, the hidden science of the sovereign savage. Resilience is often spoken of as a mindset, an internal fire, a psychological force that keeps men standing when others crumble. But this is only part of the truth. True resilience is not just mental fortitude, it is biological adaptation. It is encoded into your nervous system, hormones, and cellular structure. It is something that can be fortified, enhanced, and weaponized, if you know how. The sovereign savages in this book did not just think resiliently, they were biologically reinforced against suffering. Their bodies were trained to override fear, pain, and fatigue. Whether they knew the science or not, they hardened their psychology through extreme conditioning, controlled suffering, and intentional adaptation. This section is your initiation into that process. The biological engine of resilience. Your body has a hidden infrastructure of resilience, a network of biochemicals, neural pathways, and stress response systems that determine how well you will endure suffering. Some men crumble under stress. Others adapt and dominate it. What is the difference? Biological fortification. Here are the 3 primary resilience biomarkers and how to hack them for unbreakable toughness. Neuropeptide Y, NPY, the biochemical shield against stress. What is it? Neuropeptide Y is a neurotransmitter released in response to extreme stress. It blunts anxiety, reduces emotional distress, and keeps the mind clear under pressure. High levels of NPY are found in Special Forces soldiers, elite athletes, and war survivors, men who remain calm under duress while others break down. How to fortify NPY naturally. Extreme physical training, high-intensity workouts, resistance training, and cold exposure increases NPY, making stress feel less overwhelming over time. Fasting and hunger exposure. Controlled fasting trains your nervous system to function under stress, reinforcing NPY production. Controlled breathwork. Deep breathing, the Wim Hof method, box breathing, and Tumo, stimulates NPY release, enhancing focus and stress resistance. Deliberate adversity exposure, seeking hardship voluntarily. Cold showers, fasting, solitude, hot peppers, and exhaustion conditions your system to expect and handle stress better. DHEA, the stress antidote and recovery catalyst. What is it? DHEA is the precursor hormone that counteracts the destructive effects of cortisol, which is the stress hormone. High DHEA to cortisol ratios are found in high-stress survivors, military personnel, and endurance athletes. Men who recover faster sustain peak function under pressure better and avoid burnout. How to maximize DHEA. Heavy resistance training. Lifting naturally boosts DHEA, improving testosterone levels and stress resilience. Sunlight and vitamin D. Sun exposure optimizes DHEA production, reinforcing biochemical toughness. Deep sleep mastery. DHEA is highest in men with consistent deep sleep cycles, those who prioritize recovery as much as exertion. And mental framing against stress. Viewing stress as a challenge rather than a threat increases DHEA production, flipping stress from a destructive force into a strength-building one. Brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF, the neuroplasticity weapon for adaptability. What is it? BDNF is a growth factor that regenerates neural pathways, making your brain more adaptable, resilient, and resistant to trauma. High BDNF levels are found in men who embrace new challenges, force themselves into discomfort, and never stop evolving. How to increase BDNF for maximum adaptability? Aerobic and endurance training, running, cycling, and any sustained effort dramatically boosts BDNF, reinforcing mental resilience. Cold shock exposure. Ice baths and cold showers trigger BDNF production, enhancing mental and physical toughness. Deliberate skill acquisition. Learning new physical or mental skills, martial arts, chess, survival tactics, stimulates BDNF, reinforcing long-term adaptability. Intermittent fasting and ketosis. Time-restricted eating and keto-based metabolism increase BDNF, enhancing cognitive flexibility under stress. Each chapter will conclude with a biological fortification segment, giving the reader a practical, science-backed strategy to biologically enhance resilience. NPY training, cold exposure, breath control, and hunger exposure will be integrated into praxis challenges. DHEA optimization, strength training, recovery protocols, and stress reframing strategies will be prescribed for hormonal resilience. And BDNF mastery, cognitive and endurance challenges will be infused into the mental toughness rituals. The Immutable Resilience Protocol. Starting today, you will, number 1, expose yourself to controlled discomfort, cold, hunger, exhaustion, to increase NPY. Number 2, lift heavy and train hard to reinforce DHEA, making stress an anabolic force rather than a destructive one. 3, manage stress reframing. Stop seeing stress as suffering. See it as a biological weapon to be wielded. 4, engage in cognitive warfare. Force the mind to adapt daily with new skills and challenges, keeping BDNF levels high and adaptability constant. And 5, track your resilience like a warrior preparing for battle, not passively, but as a mission to fortify your mind and body into an unbreakable force. Chapter 1, Tlahuicole, the man who chose death over submission, the warrior who refused to kneel. There are men who live by instinct, bending the forces of their circumstances. And then there are men who live by an unshakable code, so unyielding that even death cannot move them. Tlahuicole was one of those men. A warrior unlike any other, he stood against the mightiest empire of his time, not just in battle, but in spirit. While others surrendered to fate, he denied it, choosing instead to die on his own terms, undefeated in will, unshaken in body, and immortal in legend. His life is a testament to the true nature of the immutable man, a man who, in the face of absolute power, suffering, and inevitable destruction, never breaks. The rise of Tlahuicole, a warrior beyond fear. Tlahuicole was a warrior of the Tlaxcalans, a fierce Mesoamerican people who fought relentlessly against the mighty Aztec Empire. The Tlaxcalans, though vastly unnumbered, refused to submit to Aztec rule, resisting them in endless wars and becoming the last unconquered people of central Mexico. Among them, Tlahuicole was the mightiest of them all. The rise of Tlahuicole, a warrior beyond fear. Tlahuicole was not merely a warrior, he was a force of nature, a man whose very name sent tremors through the battlefield. His reputation was not built on words or myths. It was forged in blood, sweat, and war. A warrior so strong that even the Aztecs feared him. Strength in war was everything. It determined who lived, who died, and who would be remembered when the dust settles. Among the Tlaxcalans, who were already feared for their relentless defiance in Aztec rule, Tlahuicole stood above the others. His sheer physical might was unmatched. Unlike most warriors of the era who relied on speed and agility, Tlahuicole was a living fortress, a titan of raw power. When he entered the battlefield, it was not a contest, it was a slaughter. He wielded weapons most men could literally not even lift. While others carried obsidian-edged clubs and small spears, Tlahuicole wielded a weapon so massive and heavy that he and only he had the strength to use it effectively. His blows did not wound, they shattered bone and ended battles. The Aztecs did not just respect him, they feared him. They had fought thousands of warriors, but they had never faced one who fought like a god of war incarnate, cutting down enemies in single strikes, moving through the ranks like a storm through reeds. A strategist so cunning that he led campaigns against overwhelming odds. War is not won by brute strength alone. It requires cunning, deception, and the ability to turn disadvantages into victories. Tlahuicole was not just a weapon. He was a commander, a master of the battlefield, and a nightmare to his enemies. He turned smaller forces into deadly battles. When outnumbered, Tlahuicole did not retreat. He adapted, using terrain, ambush tactics, and sheer aggression to dismantle larger Aztec forces. He outmaneuvered the greatest military empire in Mesoamerica. The Aztecs had numbers, resources, and near endless warriors, but Tlahuicole's battlefield strategies repeatedly humiliated their legions. He fought in campaigns that would have been unwinnable. When other leaders would have surrendered, he led from the front, inspiring his warriors to defy death itself. The Aztecs, who crushed countless civilizations under their might, could not break him on the battlefield. So when they finally captured him, they did not see a prisoner. They saw a weapon they wished to wield. A fighter so legendary that his name became a war cry. There are warriors, and then there are legends, men who, even in death, became eternal symbols of defiance. Tlahuicole's name was not just spoken, it was shouted, roared, and invoked in battle by Tlaxcalan warriors, a reminder that one man's unbreakable will could defy an empire. His name was synonymous with absolute resilience. To invoke Tlahuicole was to summon the spirit of a warrior who never surrendered, never compromised, and never feared death. His presence alone turned battles. Men fought harder when they saw him, knowing they stood alongside a man who had never lost in open combat. His final battle elevated him to godlike status. Even in chains, surrounded by an empire that wished to own him, he still chose defiance. He fought, he slaughtered, and he forced the Aztecs to kill him because they could never truly own him. Tlahuicole was not just a man of war, he was war itself. This is the spirit you must now challenge. The test of unbreakable will. When the Aztecs finally took Tlahuicole alive, they did something unexpected. They refused to sacrifice him outright. Most captives, especially warriors, were dragged to the temple steps and immediately killed in ritual sacrifice, their hearts ripped out as offerings to the gods. But Tlahuicole was different. He was too great a warrior, too powerful a leader to be discarded. So instead of executing him, the Aztecs did something unheard of. They offered him a position of power within their own military. They did not want to kill him, they wanted to own him. They wanted his strength, his mind, his legendary status to be used for their empire instead of against it. They gave him a choice: join us, lead our armies, and live. And this is where Tlahuicole's legend became immortal. The man who rejected the empire. Most men, when faced with death, bend. Most men, when faced with a power greater than their own, find a way to rationalize submission. Most men, when given an opportunity to live at the cost of their integrity, compromised. Tlahuicole did none of these things. Instead of joining the Aztecs, he refused their offer outright. He would rather die Tlaxcalan warrior than live as an Aztec general. But the Aztecs, unwilling to waste such a valuable warrior, offered him a second option. They would allow him one final opportunity to prove his worth in combat, not as an Aztec, but as a warrior fighting for his own glory, his own honor. A battle against death itself. Tlahuicole accepted. The death match, Tlahuicole's final war. The Aztecs placed Tlahuicole on a gladiatorial platform, surrounded by waves of enemy warriors, their finest and most ruthless fighters. He was given a wooden club embedded with razor-sharp obsidian blades. He was chained at the ankle, unable to escape. This was not a battle for survival, only for honor. One by one, Aztec warriors came to kill him, and one by one, he slaughtered them all. He fought without fear, without hesitation, and without mercy. Each warrior that came at him fell, his obsidian-bladed club cutting through flesh, breaking bone, and sending bodies tumbling into the dirt. First came the foot soldiers, cut down with ease. Then came the veterans, hardened killers, broken beneath his might. Finally came the elite jaguar and eagle warriors, the Aztec champions. Tlahuicole killed them all. For hours he fought. For hours he stood alone, surrounded by corpses of his enemies. But eventually, even the mightiest warrior tires. Even the strongest man cannot fight forever. After slaying countless foes, Tlahuicole could not fight anymore. His body was broken, exhausted, and drenched in blood, but never kneeling, never surrendering. And so, when he could fight no longer, he stretched out his arms and willingly surrendered himself to the priests. He was taken to the temple steps, his heart ripped from his chest in ritual sacrifice, but he died undefeated, a warrior to the last breath. Tlahuicole was dead, but his will was immortal. The lesson of Tlahuicole, the refusal to kneel. Tlahuicole's story is more than just a legend. It is a lesson for the modern world. In an era of comfort and avoidance, he was a man who embraced suffering and battle. In a time when people trade integrity for security, he was a man who chose death over submission. In a world where fear rules most men's lives, he was a man who stood, fought, and died unbroken. Tlahuicole's example destroys modern weakness. How many men today sell their souls for comfort? How many men surrender to fear rather than face hardship head-on? And how many men choose safety over honor and convenience over courage? The sovereign savage does not kneel to anything or anyone, not to society, not to authority, not to comfort, fear, or weakness. Tlahuicole did not die as a victim. He died as a conqueror of his own fate. And now it is your turn to prove whether you are made of the same steel. The praxis of Tlahuicole, the trial of unyielding will. Tlahuicole was not just a warrior. He was a test, a measuring stick by which all men are judged. His life was a challenge to every man who has ever hesitated, retreated, or sought the easy path. He showed us that pain is temporary, but will is eternal. Most men today run from suffering. They avoid discomfort, seek convenience, and rationalize their weakness. But to become immutable, you must do what Tlahuicole did. You must embrace suffering willingly and use it as proof of your dominance. You are about to undertake the trial of Tlahuicole, a challenge designed to break your attachment to comfort, destroy hesitation, and make pain your ally. The three pillars of the trial. Tlahuicole's final stand embodied three fundamental principles of the immutable man. Voluntary hardship. He chose to suffer rather than submit. Endurance without escape. He fought until he could fight no more. and death over submission. He would rather die on his own terms than live under another's rule. Your trial will mirror these principles. It will push you past your limits, force you into suffering, and demand that you do not break. The trial of Tlahuicole, the voluntary suffering challenge. You will endure suffering on your own terms. You will enter the battle willingly, knowing you cannot escape. This trial will last one full day, 24 hours, and will be divided into 3 escalating phases, each designed to strip away weakness and replace it with unshakable willpower. But this is not just a mental test. This is a biological reprogramming. Every step of this trial is designed to chemically, hormonally, and neurologically alter your system. By the end, you will have forced your nervous system to increase neuropeptide Y, making you permanently more stress resistant. Triggered surges in brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF, rewiring your brain for adaptability, discipline, and fear control. And raised your DHEA, enhancing your ability to override stress, recover faster, and sustain endurance under pressure. This is not symbolic suffering. This is a hardwired change. Phase 1, the shackles of voluntary hardship. The morning, the first 6 hours. You will impose hardship upon yourself, embracing the mindset that suffering is a choice, not a curse. Fasting and hunger exposure. No food for the first 6 hours. If you are accustomed to fasting, increase the difficulty. Cut out caffeine or go longer. Biological effect. It increases NPY levels, making your body more stress resistant and your mind less prone to panic under adversity. And it triggers BDNF production, reinforcing your ability to remain sharp under stress rather than mentally crashing. Cold exposure. Take a cold shower or ice bath, standing in silence. Feel the cold, but do not resist it. Embrace it, own it, and absorb it. Biological effect. It activates BDNF and dopamine surges, strengthening mental fortitude and fear response control. Raises norepinephrine levels, which hardens your nervous system against stress and discomfort. Endurance training, physical suffering, a long-distance run, weighted march, or body weight challenge. No music, no distractions, just you and the suffering. Feel it. Own it. Take control of it. Biological effect increases DHEA, making you more resistant to cortisol, the stress hormone. Triggers long-term adaptation to the nervous system, rewiring how your body processes exhaustion. No complaints, no excuses, no breaks. You enter this willingly. You endure it because you chose it. Phase 2, the Unbreakable stand, afternoon, hours 6 to 18. Now the real battle begins. Like Tlahuicole facing waves of warriors, you will be tested by exhaustion, hunger, and discomfort. Silence and isolation. For the next 3 to 4 hours, no phone, no distractions, no talking. You face yourself alone. Pain and physical endurance. Pick an exercise and push past your limits. Push-ups, squats, planks. You set a ridiculous number and finish it, no matter how long it takes. This will further raise DHEA, conditioning your body to endure prolonged hardship without breaking. And it triggers muscular and nervous system adaptation, reinforcing your ability to persist beyond perceived limits. Meditation in discomfort. Hold a plank, squat, or other difficult position for as long as possible without quitting. BDNF spikes in response to endurance-based suffering, rewiring the brain to associate hardship with personal power rather than avoidance. No music, no dopamine hits, no external comfort. You must learn to find peace in pain. Phase 3. The death before dishonor oath, the final 6 hours. Reflect on what owns you, what fear still holds you back, what excuses do you still make, Write them down, stare at them, acknowledge them. This strengthens the amygdala's resilience, training your emotional center to override negative loops rather than reinforcing them. Neural pruning occurs, meaning your brain starts eliminating weak behavioral pathways and reinforcing stronger, more resilient ones. Destroy the excuses. Burn the paper. Tear it apart. This is your ritual of severance. You are no longer a man who makes excuses. Take the final oath. Repeat aloud. Pain is irrelevant. Fear is an illusion. I do not kneel. I do not break. I do not falter. I do not submit. My will is mine, and no force shall own me. This verbal affirmation isn't just psychological. It creates a cognitive imprint, reinforcing resilience pathways in the prefrontal cortex. Then, as one final act of defiance, end the trial with a final test of pain or discipline. If physical, do a last max effort challenge, sprint, burpees, push-ups, planks. If mental, plunge into ice water or maintain absolute silence for the final stretch. This will trigger a final surge in dopamine and norepinephrine, training your body to associate suffering with conquest rather than fear. The completion of the trial, a permanent biological upgrade. By the time this trial is over, you will have reinforced NPY production, making you permanently less reactive to stress, discomfort, and pressure. Elevated DHEA, ensuring you don't just handle stress, but thrive under it. And spiked BDNF, ensuring that the neural pathways of weakness die and new pathways of resilience are permanently locked in. This is not just temporary, this is rewiring at the cellular level. Final question, are you ready? This is not a challenge to read about. This is not a theory to consider. This is not something you attempt. You either do it or you do not. Tlahuicole did not just face suffering, he embraced it and mastered it. If you accept this trial, your transformation begins now. Chapter 2, Roy Shaw, the Unbreakable Bare-Knuckle Hardman. The man who refused to be broken. There are men who survive suffering, and then there are men who bend suffering to their will, using it as a forge, a weapon, and a tool for absolute dominance. Roy Shaw was the latter. He was not just a fighter, he was a force of sheer brutality, a man who took every ounce of pain inflicted it upon him and returned it tenfold. He was not shaped by fear, weakness, or submission. He was shaped by war, by steel, by raw defiance against a world that tried to destroy him. While most men avoid pain, he invited it. While most men fear consequences, he laughed at them. And while most men break under the weight of suffering, he became harder, meaner, and more dangerous. Roy Shaw wasn't just a bare-knuckle brawler. He was a walking declaration that no system, no authority, and no amount of suffering could ever own him. Born into violence, the making of a savage. Roy Shaw was born in 1936 in the East End of London, a world of brutality, poverty, and survival by any means necessary. He learned young that only the strong survive. London's underworld was not a place for the weak. If you hesitated, you were exploited, beaten, and erased. Violence wasn't a choice, it was a natural order. From an early age, Shaw understood that life had only two types of people, predators and prey. He was never going to be the latter. While other kids played, Roy fought. While other kids dreamed of comfort, Roy dreamed of strength. He became obsessed with physical supremacy, training relentlessly to become bigger, stronger, and harder than any man who crossed him. The system's attempt to break him, the torture of Broadmoor Prison. Roy Shaw was a fighter long before he ever stepped into a ring. But the real war was fought not on the streets, but inside the walls of Broadmoor Prison, where the system tried to erase him. In the 1960s, after a violent robbery conviction, Shaw was declared criminally insane and sent to Broadmoor, a psychiatric prison known for its brutality. This was not a normal prison. It was a psychological warfare chamber. It was where the system sent men to be mentally broken, their wills shattered under the weight of confinement and cruelty. But Roy Shaw did not break. In Broadmoor, he was subjected to electroshock therapy, violent jolts of electricity meant to override his mind, strip him of his defiance, and pacify his aggression. But that wasn't enough for them. They drugged him heavily, pumping him full of powerful cocktails and antipsychotics, a chemical straitjacket designed to turn him into a docile, compliant shell of a man. They wanted him numb, detached, and incapable of resisting authority. They tried to strip him of his identity, rewire his instincts, and chemically neuter the warrior inside of him. Most men collapsed under this kind of attack. They emerged from Broadmoor as ghosts, docile, broken, shadows of the men they once were. But Roy Shaw was not most men. Instead of weakening him, the system made him even harder. Instead of erasing him, they sharpened his hatred and resolve. He trained through the sedation, fought through the fog, and refused to let them steal his will. He rejected victimhood. He refused to kneel. They thought they were taming him, but they were only sharpening his blade. Instead of weakening him, this system made him harder. He continued to train and fought through the fog and refused to let them steal his will. By the time Shaw was released, he was a machine of pure savagery, a man who had been tortured by the system and spat back in its face. He was not just free, he was reborn as something even more dangerous. He had been inside the machine designed to break men, and he had walked out stronger than ever. He had one mission: to reclaim his power by any means necessary. Roy Shaw, the bare-knuckle king, wore without gloves. When Shaw stepped into the world of bare-knuckle fighting, he wasn't just entering a sport, he was entering a war. No gloves, no rules, no padding, just fists, blood, and pure dominance. The objective was not to score points, it was to destroy the man in front of you, and Roy Shaw was built for destruction. He was too violent for traditional boxing, too aggressive for controlled fights. Bare knuckle was his only domain, a battleground where only the hardest men survived. He fought like a man with something to prove, because he did. Every punch was a message to the world: you will never own me. He broke bones, smashed faces, and became a legend of the underground fight circuit. Even as he aged, his savagery did not wane. While most fighters slowed down, Roy Shaw kept going, taking fights well into his 40s and 50s, proof that the will of a true warrior does not decay with time. The legacy of an immutable man. Roy Shaw's story is not one of redemption. It is one of dominion over suffering. He was tortured by the system and came out stronger. He was beaten in the ring but never truly defeated. He was tested by the worst that life could offer, and he made it his fuel. Roy Shaw was proof of an eternal truth. You are only broken if you allow yourself to be. Pain is not an enemy. It is a weapon you must learn to wield. The system cannot own you unless you surrender to it. Most men will never experience this level of hardship, but all men will be tested. They will face suffering. They will be beaten down, and they will be tempted to kneel. And in those moments, they will either embrace the mentality of Roy Shaw, or they will fold like the world expects them to. The bare-knuckle trial, the path to a mind harder than bone. You will endure, you will not retreat, you will not negotiate with pain. This is not just a physical trial, this is a psychological war against weakness. For one full day, 24 hours, you will train like a man who refuses to be broken. Every part of this trial is designed to increase NPY, BDNF, and DHEA, biologically reprogramming you to resist suffering instead of submitting to it. NPY rewiring. Your nervous system will override fear and stress, making you permanently more calm under pressure. BDNF activation. Your brain will adapt to endurance suffering, ensuring pain tolerance increases permanently. DHEA surge. Your body will recover from stress faster, making you biochemically harder to break. By the time this trial is over, you will be biologically, mentally, and physically stronger than ever before. Phase 1, the conditioning of the iron mind. The morning, the first 6 hours. The first phase of the bare knuckle trial is about overcoming pain through direct confrontation. Strike training, the bone conditioning ritual. Bare knuckle conditioning, you will strike a heavy bag or a hard surface repeatedly, conditioning your fists, wrists, and forearms. Start with 300 strikes per hand. No gloves, no wraps, only your flesh and will. You will not stop until your hands throb, your forearms scream, and your bones harden. The science behind the forge. The process of bone strengthening through repeated impact and stress is known as Wolff's Law, a principle stating that bone adapts to the loads placed upon it. When bones experience microtrauma from repeated strikes or weight-bearing stress, they respond by increasing bone mineral density. The body deposits more calcium and minerals in response to impact, making the bone denser and more resistant to fractures. Strengthening periosteal, the outer bone layers. The outermost layer of bone thickens, reinforcing the structure and making it more shock resistant. Enhancing osteoblast activity. Osteoblasts, bone-building cells, become more active, repairing microfractures and ensuring each stressor makes the bone stronger over time. This is not just metaphorical, it is a real biological adaptation. Just as muscles grow in response to training, bones become denser and tougher through repeated force and impact. This is why bare-knuckle fighters, Muay Thai warriors, and ancient soldiers hardened their hands and shins through continuous striking. They were not just training a skill, they were physically altering their bone structure into weapons of war. Application in the bare-knuckle trial. Every strike you deliver without gloves sends shock waves to the bone, triggering osteoblast activity. The more repeated impact over time, the denser and harder your bones become. By the end of the bare knuckle trial, your hands will not just feel harder, they will be physically stronger. This is how Roy Shaw became a living weapon. Now it's your turn. Biological effect. It will trigger NPY release, rewiring how your brain interprets pain. Strengthens the bones and connective tissue, preventing long-term injuries. And breaks the fear of impact, making pain something you adapt to rather than avoid. Brutal cardio, the pain endurance test. Sledgehammer swings, hill sprints, or burpees to absolute exhaustion. The goal is not to feel good. The goal is to reach the breaking point and stay there. When your body begs to stop, you keep moving. This will activate BDNF, ensuring your mind rewires itself for endurance. And DHEA will surge, reinforcing faster stress recovery and prolonged resilience. Water deprivation for 6 hours, the controlled hardship. You will not drink any water for the first half of the day. This forces your body to function under discomfort, sharpening your ability to perform under controlled suffering. This will increase stress resistance at the nervous system level, raises the body's ability to regulate hydration under duress, and mentally forces discipline, no indulgence, only willpower. Phase 2, the Unbreakable stand, afternoon, hours 6 to 18. Roy Shaw endured psychological and physical attacks meant to pacify him, but he trained through the sedation, through the pain, and through the exhaustion. Now you will simulate the same resistance. The isolation gauntlet. No stimulation, no distraction. For 3 hours, absolute silence. No phone, no talking, no distractions. You sit, you breathe, and you feel the mental pressure build. Most men freak out in silence. You will embrace it and make it your ally. This will force NPY and dopamine recalibration, making you immune to boredom and distraction. and it strengthens the prefrontal cortex, making you mentally sharper under stress. The pain forging circuit, full body suffering. Push-ups, squats, dead hangs, heavy carries, all to absolute failure. When your muscles scream, you will silence them. When your body quits, your mind keeps going. This will trigger BDNF and muscle adaptation, increasing pain tolerance, and forces the mind to override the body, breaking the illusion of limitation. The no comfort rule, no sitting, no resting. For the next 6 hours, you do not sit down. You stand, you kneel, you move, but you do not take comfort. This will biochemically eliminate the modern addiction to comfort, and it mentally enforces discipline. There is no negotiation with hardship. Phase 3, the death before dishonor oath, the final 6 hours. The final stage is where you prove to yourself that you do not break. The reflection of absolute ownership. You will write down your past moments of weakness, hesitation, and submission. You will stare at them, unflinching, and acknowledge them without self-pity. You will burn the past. The paper will be burned, shredded, or destroyed, symbolizing that those moments are no longer part of you. This will strengthen neural pathways for self-reliance, permanently rewiring weak narratives. And it eliminates mental loops that reinforce hesitation and fear. The Oath of Roy Shaw. You will speak aloud. I do not retreat. I do not bow. I do not kneel. Pain is not my enemy. It is my forge. I do not break. I do not quit. I do not submit. From this moment forward, I am harder than the world that seeks to soften me. This will seal the trial at a neurological level, making pain tolerance a fundamental part of the identity rather than an external struggle. The final war against weakness, one last test. One last brutal exercise, full sprint or push-up max. The last push must be the hardest of the day. This will force the full system adrenaline release, locking in every lesson learned, and it will ensure the brain registers this trial as a defining moment of strength. The completion of the trial, a permanent rewiring. By the end of this trial, you will have rewired MPY and DHEA levels, making stress feel less overwhelming and recover from pain faster. It will spike BDNF, ensuring that endurance and suffering is permanently easier. And it will condition your body to accept discomfort without complaint, proving to yourself that pain does not own you, you own it. This is not a temporary challenge, this is a transformation. Now you understand why Roy Shaw could not be broken, because he did not allow himself to be. The question now is, will you allow yourself to be broken? If not, you begin now. Chapter 3. Charles Bronson, the mad titan of solitary confinement. The man who made a prison his kingdom. Some men crumble when they are left alone with their own mind. Most men, when placed in solitary confinement, break within weeks, sometimes days. Their thoughts turn against them, their sense of reality warps, and their will begins to decay in the crushing weight of silence. Charles Bronson spent decades in isolation, and instead of breaking, he grew stronger. He turned his cell into a forge, his mind into a fortress, and his body into a weapon. He was not just a prisoner, he was the warlord of his own reality. He refused to be pacified, refused to be owned, and refused to kneel to anyone. Most men fear the loss of freedom. Bronson had his freedom taken, but they could never take his sovereignty. The Origins of Chaos, from Michael Peterson to Charles Bronson. Charles Bronson was not born in chains, but he was born for war. In 1952, as Michael Peterson, he was raised in an environment that bred toughness. By the time he was in his early teens, he was already known for his violent streak, his refusal to back down, and his love for combat. He found purpose in chaos, and chaos followed him wherever he went. At 22, he was arrested for armed robbery. The system expected another broken man, another prisoner to be processed, controlled, and reformed. But Bronson was not a man to be controlled. He rebelled against the prison system from the moment he arrived. He became a legend for his outbursts of defiance, taking hostages, fighting guards, and dismantling cells. Every punishment they gave him only made him stronger. He spent more time in solitary confinement than any other prisoner in British history, and yet, in the void of total isolation, he did not lose himself. Instead, he became something else entirely. The creation of Charles Bronson, becoming more than a man. Michael Peterson died in the cell, and Charles Bronson was born. He rejected his given name and forged a new one, inspired by the Hollywood tough guy actor. He refused to let the system shape him, so he shaped himself. He was not just a prisoner, he was a legend of defiance, an untamed force that could not be subdued. Where other men saw four walls as a cage, he saw them as a training ground. While others rotted, he grew. While others broke, he hardened. And while others begged for parole, he chose to remain caged rather than bow to authority. He trained relentlessly, developing inhuman strength using only his body and sheer willpower. He did push-ups by the thousands, isometric holds for hours, neck bridges, fingertip push-ups, and burpees in the dark. Every moment an act of defiance. Even locked in total silence, surrounded by nothing but concrete, Bronson remained undefeated. He transformed prison into a proving ground, not just for his body, but for his mind. The Unchained Madness, Charles Bronson's legendary prison antics. To call Charles Bronson merely a prisoner is to misunderstand him entirely. He was not just a man behind bars. He was a force of chaos, a nightmare for authority, and a walking hurricane of defiance. He was moved between over 120 different prisons, not because he was weak, but because no prison could hold him for long enough before he tore it apart from the inside. He became infamous for taking hostages multiple times, just to prove that he still controlled his own fate. He turned prison cells into war zones, fighting guards, tearing apart furniture, and waging psychological warfare against the system. Some men go to prison and lose themselves. Bronson went to prison and became larger than life. The most infamous standoffs in British prison history. If there was one thing Bronson was known for, it was his legendary uncontrollable defiance against anyone who tried to control him. The time he took a civilian hostage just to demand a cup of tea. In 1994, Bronson took a prison librarian hostage, not for money, not for escape, but to demand a helicopter, a machine gun, and a cup of tea. For 44 hours, he held the man captive, staging one of the longest standoffs in UK prison history. His reason? Because he could. Because he wanted to prove that even in chains, he was in control. He eventually released the hostage unharmed, after doing hundreds of push-ups in his cell to pass the time. Why did Bronson suddenly release the librarian? Because Danielson farted. Bronson was so disgusted by the man's bodily function that he lost interest in keeping him captive. It wasn't out of pity or remorse. Bronson just found it offensive to his standards of chaos and entertainment. After enduring riot squads, brutal fights, and endless solitary confinement, it was a single fart that ended the standoff. This is the essence of Charles Bronson, completely unpredictable, operating by his own set of rules. The roof takeover rampages. Bronson scaled prison roofs multiple times, staging full-scale rebellions against the system. He ripped apart roof tiles, threw debris at guards, and caused millions of pounds in damage. These weren't escape attempts, they were demonstrations. They were rituals of defiance, reminders that no cage could contain him. The 15-minute bare-knuckle war against a dozen guards. One of the most brutal incidents in British prison history occurred when Bronson fought off a full squad of riot guards alone. 12 men, body armor, riot shields, batons against one man. For 15 minutes he fought, throwing haymakers, headbutting helmets, and smashing through batons. It took them everything they had to finally restrain him. He walked away laughing, covered in blood, undefeated in spirit. The man who refused to be controlled. Most men would break after just one of these events. Most men would give up, submit, and surrender. Bronson never surrendered. No matter how many times they moved him, drugged him, locked him away in deeper and darker cells, he came back even more defiant. He took whatever punishments they gave him and turned them into symbols of his own dominance. They thought they were taming a beast, but all they did was make him stronger. Charles Bronson was not just a prisoner, he was an idea, a living testament that no system, no authority, and no prison could ever truly own a man who refuses to kneel. The philosophy of the unbreakable mind. Bronson was not just a fighter, he was a philosopher of defiance. His time in isolation forged a doctrine of mental warfare that very few men have ever mastered. Suffering is a choice. Weakness is surrender. Pain is not your enemy, it is your trainer. You are only caged if you allow yourself to be. The system wanted to break him, but he turned the system into his own battlefield. He refused parole multiple times because he would rather be free inside of his own mind than kneel to their rules. He fought relentlessly against any force that tried to diminish him. Even behind bars, he remained a sovereign savage, his will untamed and his mind unshackled. Bronson's story is not just about prison. It is about war against the self. Most men are trapped by comfort, addiction, distraction, or fear. Charles Bronson was trapped by steel doors and concrete walls, but unlike most men, he never let himself be owned. The legacy of a man who could never be broken. Charles Bronson is proof that a man's true prison is not made of bars, it is made of his own mind. He was confined, yet freer than most men. He was tortured, yet unbroken. He was silenced, yet more defiant than ever. This is the ultimate truth of sovereignty. Freedom is not about location, it is about dominion over the self. Most men cannot sit in silence for more than an hour without reaching for their phone. Most men cannot stand solitude without distraction, without stimulation, without crumbling under the weight of their own thoughts. And yet Bronson sat in isolation for decades and never lost control of his mind. This is his lesson to you. If you cannot control your mind, if you cannot command your thoughts, if you cannot endure solitude without distraction, then you are already a prisoner. And now you're about to face the same test. The praxis of Charles Bronson, the solitary confinement trial. Charles Bronson was not merely locked away, he was tested by the greatest enemy of modern man, solitude. Most men think they fear violence, pain, or hardship, but those are physical struggles, and physical struggles are easier to overcome. What they truly fear is being alone with their own mind. No distractions, no noise, no validation, no escape. Solitude is where most men break, where they lose their grip on reality, where they spiral into weakness, where their thoughts devour them. Bronson spent decades in isolation and never cracked. He did not crumble under silence, he weaponized it. He did not let his mind turn against him, he turned it into a fortress. And he did not beg for escape, he dominated his own reality. Most men today can't even sit in a quiet room for 10 minutes, let alone 10 years and more, without checking their phone. Now you will learn what it means to be alone with your own mind and emerge even stronger. The solitary confinement trial, the war against mental weakness. This trial will strip you of every artificial crutch. You will be placed into voluntary solitude and forced to confront your mind, your fears, your thoughts, and your excuses, without distraction, without relief. By the end of this trial, your nervous system will have recalibrated to endure isolation and control over external stimuli. Phase 1, the total information blackout. Morning, first 6 hours. No phone, no internet, no screens, no music. The first and easiest way to test your mental sovereignty is to strip yourself of the digital leash that controls modern men. You will not be reachable. You will not be entertained. You will not be pacified. This will increase dopamine baseline stability, retaining your brain to function without constant external stimulus. And it will force an immediate recalibration of your nervous system, reinforcing control over boredom, anxiety, and impulsive distraction seeking. No conversations, no validation, no external human interaction. You are on your own. Your mind is your only company. You will learn how quickly most men crumble without external validation. This will trigger NPY pathways, strengthening mental discipline and tolerance to solitude. And it will force internal self-reliance, removing the crutch of external opinions and stimulation. You will write down every weak thought that emerges. As your mind rebels against the silence, you will record every excuse, every distraction, every fear, and every moment of weakness. You will document your mental resistance to solitude so you can see it, own it, and obliterate it. Phase 2, the abyss of the mind, confronting the shadows. The afternoon, hours 6 to 18. Now your mind turns inward. Dark room isolation, no visual or auditory stimuli. You will sit alone in total silence for 3 hours. No light, no distractions, no external stimulus. You will face the thing most modern men fear most, pure solitude. This will deeply recalibrate your dopamine receptors, removing addiction to external stimulation. And it will trigger neuroplasticity adaptation, reinforcing long-term resilience to isolation. Confront the mind, the internal audit of fear. You will take every fear, regret, weakness, or hesitation and write it down in brutal honesty. This is your personal interrogation, where you see yourself without illusion or excuse. This is cognitive restructuring. Your mind will begin forming new, stronger neural pathways. BDNF activation ensures that solitude becomes a skill rather than a struggle. The silent war, 1 hour of pure stillness. You will remain completely still, completely silent, without movement or external input. This is where your body will scream for distraction, and you will deny it. This will desensitize the nervous system to distress signals from the mind, and it will build absolute control over focus, thoughts, and anxiety. Phase 3, the sovereign mind oath, the final test, the final 6 hours. Now you take absolute control. Destroy the weakness list. Every weakness you wrote down in phase 1 is now obliterated, burned, torn, or shredded. This is the final severance from dependency on distractions, validations, and external control. The Bronson Oath. You will speak aloud. My mind is mine alone. It is unshackled, untamed, and unbreakable. I do not need noise. I do not need escape. I do not need permission. I am sovereign over my thoughts, my focus, and my will. From this moment forward, I am no longer a prisoner of my own mind. I am its master. Its biological effect. This will cause neural reinforcement of self-dominion. This moment becomes locked into memory as a personal threshold of control. Final ritual, the Iron Mind Challenge. For the last 30 minutes, you will engage in absolute mental focus, a creative pursuit, or deep meditation. This is the first step into a life free from distraction and mental enslavement. This will ensure dopamine stability, reinforcing long-term cognitive resilience. And it locks in the ability to control focus at will, creating mental dominance. The completion of the trial, a mind unshackled. By the time this trial ends, you will have stripped away all your distractions and external control over your mind. You will have rewired your nervous system to withstand isolation, and mastered the ability to sit in silence without fear, without craving, without needing escape, and turned solitude into strength. Like Bronson, you will never be owned by your own thoughts again. Most men today are slaves to their impulses. They cannot be alone with their own mind. Bronson spent decades alone and emerged stronger. Now you have proven that you can do the same. Are you ready? If you cannot sit alone with your own mind, you are already a prisoner. If you require external validation, constant stimulation, or a crutch to keep you occupied, you do not own yourself. This trial is not optional. This is a requirement for sovereignty. You either emerge unbreakable or you remain shackled. Your choice. Chapter 4. Robert Crisp, the indestructible war machine. The soldier who refused to die. Some men are made for war. Some men are built for chaos. But very few men thrive in both, relentlessly, repeatedly, as if death itself cannot claim them. Robert Crisp was one of those men. A tank commander who fought in some of the most brutal battles of World War II. A man who survived injuries, death sentences, and overwhelming odds, only to keep fighting. A warrior who refused to accept any limitation placed upon him, whether by war, age, or society itself. Where most men break under extreme conditions, Crisp became stronger. Where most men seek comfort after war, Crisp sought new battles. Where most men fear aging, Crisp ran marathons across mountains well into his 60s. He was not just a soldier, he was war personified. A warrior from birth, the making of a savage. Robert Crisp was born in South Africa in 1911, a time when survival was earned, not given. He grew up in a land that demanded resilience, tough terrain, harsh environments, and a society built on strength. Before the war even started, he was already an adventurer, a man who refused the ordinary life and sought challenges wherever he could find them. When World War II erupted, Crisp did not hesitate. He wanted the front lines. He wanted the fire. Most men fear war. Crisp ran straight into it. The indestructible tank commander, a one-man wrecking crew. Crisp was not just a soldier, he was a living nightmare for the enemy. As a tank commander in North Africa, he led battles in one of the most grueling wars in history, fighting Rommel's forces in the scorching desert. He had no regard for his own safety. He would charge straight to the enemy, leading by example, embodying the warrior's code. Even after being repeatedly wounded, he would not leave the battlefield, pushing forward, refusing anything to stop him. His reputation became legendary. He survived countless direct hits on his tanks. He fought through relentless enemy fire, emerging victorious time after time. His war record became so outrageous that even fellow soldiers began whispering that he was unkillable. Most men seek shelter when bullets fly. Crisp made the battlefield his home. The siege of willpower, fighting for days without rest. Crisp's most legendary moment came when he and his men were cornered, outgunned, and isolated, yet refused to surrender. For consecutive days, Crisp fought non-stop. Little to no sleep, no retreat, no relief. His tank was a fortress, moving and striking relentlessly against a superior force. Supplies were running low, rations, water, ammunition, but his willpower did not waver. Crew members were falling to exhaustion, but Crisp kept them moving, kept them fighting, refusing to acknowledge the possibility of defeat. Men who endure one battle are called soldiers. Men who endure days of non-stop combat without breaking are called something else entirely. Crisp did not just survive the siege, he outlasted the enemy. He did not just defend his position, he turned his dwindling resources into weapons of pure endurance, ensuring that even against impossible odds, he would not fall. This was not just war, this was a direct confrontation between his will and the limits of human endurance. And Crisp proved that most men will never even come close to discovering how far they can truly push themselves. The man who defied death again and again. Crisp's war career wasn't just a series of battles. It was a series of near-death experiences that would have killed lesser men. He was shot, he was bombed, he was hit directly by tank rounds. He survived them all. Doctors repeatedly told him that he should have been dead, but Crisp did not have the time for death. Instead of retiring, he kept finding new battles, new challenges, and new ways to defy the impossible. When the war ended, most men went home. Crisp went to fight in the Greek Civil War because war was where he belonged. When most men his age settled into comfortable retirement, Crisp ran ultramarathons across mountains, refusing to let age dictate his power. This is what it means to be immutable, to never allow time, injury, or expectation to dictate what you can and cannot do. And when most men are diagnosed with terminal cancer, they accept their fate. Crisp, he drank an experimental potion, downed a bottle of liquor, rode off on a donkey, and survived. The cancer that never stood a chance. Even when war couldn't kill Crisp, nature tried. He was diagnosed with terminal cancer, given the kind of prognosis that would make most men resign themselves to fate. Instead of undergoing conventional treatment, Crisp did only what he would do. He drank an experimental potion designed to be taken over a period of time and washed it down with a bottle of liquor, the entire thing all at once, and rode off on a journey with his donkey. Most men seek a hospital bed. Crisp sought adventure because he knew that living was more important than merely surviving. By the time he returned from his journey, the cancer was gone. Most men wait to die. Crisp refused to acknowledge it as an option. Zen and the art of donkey maintenance, a warrior's philosophy. After a life of fighting, surviving, and outrunning death, Crisp developed his own philosophy. He distilled it into a book, Zen and the Art of Donkey Maintenance, a reflection on life, adventure, and what it truly means to be free. He understood that control is an illusion. What matters is how you react to the chaos. He embraced hardship not as suffering, but as fuel for an unbreakable life. He found wisdom not in temples, but in the desert, on the battlefield, and in the presence of a stubborn donkey. He was not just a warrior, he was a thinker, an adventurer, and a Renaissance man who rejected the mundane in favor of a life truly lived. The Renaissance savage, soldier, philosopher, and athlete. Crisp was not just a fighter and adventurer, he was a man of extraordinary skill across multiple domains. He was an exceptional cricket player, representing South Africa at the highest levels. While most warriors are defined only by war, Crisp was defined by his mastery in multiple disciplines. He proved that being immutable is not being just a brute. It is about being well-rounded, adaptable, and constantly evolving. Where most men specialize, Crisp thrived in every arena: war, sport, philosophy, and endurance. Most men wait for life to dictate their fate. Crisp dictated his own. The lesson of Robert Crisp, the refusal to submit to mortality. Crisp's story is a direct challenge to every man who has ever said, "I'm too old, I'm too injured, or it's too late for me." He was shot and kept going. He was blown up and kept going. He grew old and was diagnosed with apparent terminal cancer, but he kept going and survived it. He did not wait for death. He outran it over and over again. Most men accept limits. Crisp shattered them. Most men look for comfort. Crisp ran towards the fire. Most men let their bodies dictate their actions. Crisp bent his body to his will. If there is one lesson from his life, it is this: nothing is over until you decide it is. The praxis of Robert Crisp, the indestructibility trial. Robert Crisp was not just resilient, he was a man who rejected human limitations altogether. He fought nonstop for days in a tank without sleep, food, or relief. He survived war, bullets, explosions, and even cancer because he refused to acknowledge defeat. He outran time itself, defying age by climbing mountains and running ultramarathons in his 60s. He proved that limits you believe in only exist because you accept them. Now, you will erase those limits from your mind and body. The indestructibility trial, the death of weakness. This trial is not about hitting a target. It is about obliterating your perceived limits. You will push past exhaustion until your body begs you to stop, and then you will keep going. You will override every mental excuse, every whisper of hesitation, and every false belief in what you think you can endure. You will emerge with a body and a mind that do not recognize limitation. By the end of this trial, your biology will have significantly adapted to stress, endurance, and suffering. NPY overload. Your nervous system will adapt to suffering rather than resist it, making extreme effort your default state. BDNF surge. Your brain will rewire itself for resilience, ensuring you handle stress, pain, and exhaustion with total composure. DHEA dominance. Your ability to recover from stress will skyrocket, making you impervious to fatigue and hardship. This is not just a trial, this is a reprogramming of your DNA to make you harder, stronger, and unkillable. Phase 1, the relentless body, pushing past exhaustion. Morning, first 6 hours. The first phase will destroy your attachment to comfort by forcing you to outlast your own body's limits. The 1,000 repetition challenge. You will complete 1,000 total repetitions across push-ups, squats, lunges, burpees, or weighted carries. The goal is not just muscle failure. It is a neural rewiring to override physical exhaustion. This will give you a massive NPY release, forcing your brain to normalize extreme effort as a baseline function. And it will activate BDNF, training pain tolerance and muscular endurance beyond standard human limits. Long-distance forced march or weighted carry. A brutal endurance challenge, either a weighted hike or a distance run, or a loaded carry like a ruck march. Your body will beg for relief. You will deny it. This will force lactate threshold adaptation, ensuring your endurance capacity permanently increases. And it will trigger full body stress response, forcing your nervous system to rewire how it handles exhaustion. The no sitting, no resting rule. For the first 6 hours, you will not sit down. You will either move, stand, or continue the trial. This will desensitize your nervous system to fatigue, making stillness an enemy. And it will enforce total control over the impulse to collapse or seek comfort. Phase 2, the siege of willpower, fighting through mental collapse, the afternoon, hours 6 to 18. Crisp was trapped in a tank, fighting for days without sleep, and now you will simulate the same conditions of mental and physical collapse resistance. The deprivation trial, the 24-hour mental war. You will ruck march as long as you physically can up to 24 hours. Your mind will learn to function in exhaustion. You will continue until you want to give up, but then you will give some more. Here, neural pruning will occur. Your brain will remove weak pathways and reinforce resilience-based cognition. BDNF production will skyrocket, increasing cognitive endurance and stress resistance. Fasted training, the hunger endurance challenge. For the next 12 hours, you will consume no food. Your body will shift to fat oxidation, teaching you to function under depleted conditions. This will boost NPY to its highest levels, reinforcing absolute control over hunger-driven impulses. And it will force metabolic flexibility, ensuring your body can perform under fasting conditions. Cold exposure, the last stand against weakness. At the end of your ordeal, you will take an ice bath or prolonged exposure to cold temperatures. No shivering, no panic, only control. This will cause a norepinephrine surge. Your body learns to handle pain and discomfort without triggering panic responses. And it will harden your ability to maintain focus under extreme environmental stress. It seals neural adaptation, ensuring you permanently associate suffering with power rather than avoidance. Destroy the last excuse, the weakness burial. You will write down every excuse you've ever made about your body, age, or abilities. Then you will burn or bury it, because those limits no longer exist. The indestructibility oath. You will speak aloud. Pain is an illusion. Fatigue is only a choice. Weakness is my only enemy. I do not acknowledge limits. I do not bow to exhaustion. I do not submit to age, fear, or suffering. I am more than flesh. I am will. From this moment forward, I am indestructible. This causes neural imprinting. Your brain will register this moment as a personal transformation threshold. The completion of the trial, the death of limitations. By the time this trial ends, you will have shattered your attachment to physical exhaustion, erased mental barriers of what you think you can endure, trained your nervous system to treat suffering as a state of power, proven that age, fatigue, and fear do not dictate your life. You do. Most men live in self-imposed limitations. Most men accept exhaustion, pain, and aging as absolute truths. Robert Crisp never did. Now, you no longer will either. The final question, are you ready? If you still believe in your limits, you have already lost. This trial is not an event, it is an initiation, a rite of passage. Do it or remain a prisoner to weakness. Your choice. Chapter 6, Louis Zamperini, the man who endured the unendurable. Some men are born into suffering. Others have suffering forced upon them, testing their will to its absolute breaking point. This was the case for Louis Zamperini. He was a troubled youth that turned Olympic athlete, and a World War II bombardier who survived a plane crash and 47 days stranded at sea. He was a prisoner of war subjected to inhumane torture, who never once surrendered his dignity. He was not just a survivor, he was a man who looked death straight in the eye and refused to blink. Where most people would have given up, Zamperini endured. When most people would have been broken, Zamperini bent and came back even stronger. Where most men would have fallen into despair, he rebuilt himself and reclaimed his soul. His story is one of ultimate suffering, ultimate resilience, and ultimate redemption. A wild youth, the making of a fighter. Louis Zamperini was not born with an easy road. As a child, he was rebellious, constantly getting into fights, stealing and running from the law. He had no direction, no purpose, until he discovered running. His brother introduced him to track, and Zamperini's raw energy found a new outlet, competition. He went from a street kid constantly in trouble to one of the fastest runners in the world. By 1936, he was competing in the Olympics in Berlin, representing the United States. At just 19 years old, he ran a 56-second final lap in the 5,000-meter race, so fast that even Adolf Hitler demanded to shake his hand. He was on track to break the 4-minute mile, a feat considered impossible at the time. Zamperini had gone from troubled youth to a national hero, but the world had different plans for him. War calls and Zamperini answers. When World War II broke out, Zamperini put aside his Olympic dreams and enlisted as U.S. Army Air Corps. He flew dangerous missions over the Pacific, facing enemy fire and high-stakes survival. Every flight was a gamble. Every mission could be his last. And then the nightmare began. The plane crash, 47 days in the abyss. On May 27, 1943, Louis Zamperini's life changed forever. He had already defied poverty, discipline, and the limits of human speed, rising from a troubled youth to an Olympic athlete. He had already braved the dangers of war, flying high-risk bombing missions in the Pacific. But now, the real test was about to begin. Zamperini and his crew were flying a search and rescue mission aboard a B-27 Liberator, the Green Hornet. The plane was a relic, patched together from spare parts, a malfunctioning death trap. Mid-flight, one of the engines failed, and the aircraft spiraled out of control. It crashed violently into the Pacific Ocean, killing 8 of the 11 crew members instantly. Louis Zamperini was still alive, but now he was trapped in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by nothing but water, death, and sharks. Trapped beneath the wreckage, the first battle. As the plane hit the water, Zamperini was thrown forward, tangled in the wreckage. Cables wrapped around his body, dragging him into the abyss, sinking him deeper and deeper. With his lungs screaming for air, he clawed and twisted, fighting his way out of the tangled wires. Most men would have panicked and drowned. Zamperini did not. He remained calm, untangled himself, and kicked toward the surface, his first victory against death. When he broke through, there was nothing but debris, corpses, and two survivors, Phil and Mac. Stranded at sea, the war against nature. The three men pulled themselves onto two inflatable life rafts, barely larger than their own bodies. They had no food, no water, and no weapons. The Pacific stretched endlessly around them, offering no salvation. The sun scorched their skin, blistering their flesh. Their bodies began wasting away, each day stripping more muscle, more energy, and more hope. But Zamperini was not just fighting to survive, he was fighting to keep his men alive. He refused to let Phil and Mac give up. He kept them talking, kept them engaged, and kept their minds from slipping into despair. He refused to accept the inevitable. When rain finally fell, they caught it with their hands and drank it like starving animals. When fish swam too close, Zamperini caught them barehanded, ripped them apart, and ate them raw. But nature was relentless, and soon a new predator arrived. Sharks, the battle against the abyss. The Pacific is not empty, it is alive, teeming with hunters that have ruled its waters for millions of years. At night, the sharks circled beneath them, brushing against the raft, waiting for a moment of weakness. During the day, they came closer, testing, probing, daring them to fall in. Some of the sharks were as long as the raft itself. Most men would have been paralyzed with fear. Zamperini did not hesitate. He fought them with his bare hands. He punched a shark in the nose when it got too close. When one lunged at him, he killed it with a makeshift weapon, ripped it open, and used its flesh as food. The ocean had no mercy, but neither did he. Starvation, madness, and the death of Mac. After weeks adrift, the reality of starvation set in. Their bodies shrank, their muscles atrophied, their minds drifted toward delirium. The line between dreams and reality blurred. The sun played tricks on their vision. The hunger played tricks on their sanity. And then Mac broke. He had given up long ago, lost to despair, waiting for death. One night he closed his eyes and never woke up. The raft had claimed its first victim. Zamperini and Phil buried him at sea, washing as the ocean swallowed another life. The enemy finds them. A new hell begins. On day 47, after nearly 7 weeks adrift, a plane finally spotted them. But it was not a rescue. It was a Japanese bomber. The enemy aircraft circled, then opened fire, sending bullets ripping through the water and tearing holes in the raft. Zamperini and Phil jumped into the ocean, diving below the surface while bullets rained down above. Sharks swarmed towards them, forcing them to fight on two fronts, dodging gunfire from above while kicking the predators away below. They survived, they kept fighting, they refused to surrender. But their battle wasn't over. Hours later, a Japanese patrol boat arrived. The two men were dragged aboard, beaten, blindfolded, and taken away. Zamperini had survived 47 days at sea, only to be thrown in a nightmare far worse than the ocean. The true suffering was about to begin. The prisoner of war camps awaited. But even in the face of this, Zamperini was not broken. Captured by the enemy, the hell of a Japanese POW camp. The ocean had tried to kill him. The sharks had tried to eat him. The sun had tried to burn him into nothing. None of it worked. Louis Zamperini was still alive. And now the enemy had a new plan, to break him. Dragged into the darkness, arrival at the torture camps. On July 13th, 1943, after 47 days lost at sea, Louis Zamperini and Phil were captured by the Japanese Navy. Blindfolded, bound, and beaten, they were thrown into the belly of a patrol boat and taken away. They had no idea where they were going, only that their suffering was about to get far worse. When the blindfolds came off, they were in the middle of a nightmare. The Kwajalein Atoll, known as Execution Island. A place where American prisoners are not kept, they are killed. Other soldiers have been brought there before Zamperini. None had left alive. The guards told them plainly, "You will die here." Most men would have collapsed into despair. Zamperini clenched his fists and stared into the abyss. He would not die here. He refused. Torture begins, the systematic breaking of the body. The Japanese captors had one mission, to turn Zamperini from a man into a shattered, obedient husk. He was starved, given just enough food to keep him alive, but not enough to sustain his strength. He was beaten daily, his ribs and face swelling with bruises, his body reduced to raw pain. He was stripped of dignity, treated like an animal, and forced to obey senseless commands just to humiliate him. But they needed more than just pain. They wanted submission, and so the real torture began. The object of humiliation, the ultimate endurance test. They made him stand for hours, holding heavy objects above his head. If his arms lowered, they beat him mercilessly. If he resisted, they hit him harder. The guards took turns watching, ensuring he would not get a moment to rest. They laughed as he trembled, waiting for him to collapse. They told him he would never leave this place unless he broke. Most men would have collapsed within minutes. Zamperini lasted for hours. No matter how much his arms burned, he refused to let the objects drop. No matter how much they hit him, he refused to fall. No matter how much they screamed at him, he refused to bow. Every moment he stood, he was fighting back. They could starve him, but they could not own him. They could beat him, but they could not take his will. They could threaten him, but he would not break. This was not just a test of strength. This was defiance. This was proof that no man could make him submit. The war criminal experiment used as a human guinea pig. When the Japanese realized they could not break Zamperini through beatings alone, they tried a new method. He was transferred to a Tokyo medical facility under the guise of treating prisoners. Instead, he was used as a test subject, forced to drink infected water and given experimental injections. He suffered through fevers, near-death moments, only to be sent back to the hard labor once he survived. The Japanese wanted to destroy him, mind, body, and soul, but no matter what they did, Zamperini remained defiant. The Bird, the man who made torture his religion. In 1944, Zamperini was transferred to the Amori POW camp, and this is where he met Matsuhiro Watanabe, known as the Bird. He was a psychopath, a sadist, a man who did not just hurt his prisoners, he obsessed over breaking them. The Bird made Zamperini his personal target, punishing him daily for no reason. He singled him out in front of the others, making an example out of him. He was beaten constantly, sometimes with his hands, sometimes with a club, and sometimes with whatever the Bird could find. Every time Zamperini stood back up, the Bird hit him even harder. Every time Zamperini refused to bow, the Bird took it personally. It was a battle of wills, and neither man would quit. The final trial, beaten by his own men. The Bird created a new form of punishment. He forced every single prisoner to punch Zamperini in the face. One by one, they lined up, punching him under orders. If they refused, they were beaten themselves. Zamperini's face swelled beyond recognition, and his eyes nearly shut from the punishment. Every punch sent pain ripping through his skull, but he refused to fall. He took every hit without complaint, without weakness, without a single sound of surrender. Even his own fellow prisoners could not break him. The war ends. The man who would not die walks free. In September 1945, after 2 years of beatings, starvation, and torture, Zamperini was finally freed. The war was over, but he had already won long before the enemy surrendered. He had survived what should have been impossible. He had proven that no man, no system, no torture could take away his will. He walked out of the camp not as a victim, but as an unbreakable force of resilience. They tried to kill him, they failed. They tried to erase him, they failed. They tried to break him, they failed. The lesson of Louis Zamperini, the power to endure and the power to forgive. Louis Zamperini's story is a direct challenge to every man who has ever said, "I can't take any more. I don't know how to keep going. I can't let go of what has been done to me." He survived the unsurvivable. He endured what should have broken any man. And he overcame the darkness not just by fighting it, but by transcending it. Most men let their past define them. Zamperini proved that the past is only as powerful as you allow it to be. This is his lesson to you. The true battle, redemption, and reclaiming his soul. The war had ended, the prison gates had opened. The men who had once been prisoners walked free into a world that no longer seemed real. Louis Zamperini had survived. He had defied death in every possible way. He had faced the abyss and spat back in its face. Most men think that once suffering ends, the battle is over. Most men believe that freedom is the finish line. But most men do not realize that survival is just the beginning. Zamperini had one more war to fight. This was not a battle against nature. This was not a battle against an enemy. This was a battle against himself. And this was his hardest fight yet. Freedom was not the end, the war within. When Zamperini returned home, he was greeted as a hero. Newspapers wrote about his miraculous survival. People celebrated him, his endurance, and his ability to overcome. He had everything he had once dreamed of: freedom, family, and a chance to rebuild. But what no one saw was the war still raging in his mind. He was set free, but he was not at peace. He was alive, but he was not whole. He had left the prison behind, but the prison had not left him. The bird still haunted him. The beating still played in his mind, over and over. The rage inside him burned hotter than any fire he had ever felt. Most men who endure suffering want justice. Most men who survive hell want vengeance. Most men who carry wounds want to make their tormentors suffer. And for Zamperini, the hate was consuming him. The descent, the poison of hatred. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the bird. He drank to silence the memories, but the alcohol only made them worse. His mind was trapped in a loop of rage, revenge, and destruction. He dreamed of killing Watanabe, of tracking him down and exacting his revenge. He fantasized about beating him to death, about reclaiming the power that was taken from him. His body was free, but his mind was still shackled in chains. And like a prisoner who never leaves his cell, he was becoming his own captor. Hatred is a strange thing. It feels like strength, but it is weakness. It feels like justice, but it is poison. It feels like power, but is just another kind of prison. Holding on to hate is like holding on to poison and expecting the other person to die from it. Zamperini had survived the sharks, the starvation, the beatings, the endless suffering, but now he was being devoured by something far worse. And if he did not win this battle, he would lose everything. The turning point, the hardest choice of all. At his lowest, drowning in alcohol and consumed by rage, his wife pushed him to seek something different. He found himself at a gathering, listening to a man speak of forgiveness. He had once been an atheist, a man of pure survival instinct, but now he listened. And then something inside him broke, not in weakness, but in release, not in surrender, but in victory. He dropped to his knees, overcome with an emotion he could not explain. He felt the weight of hatred lift from his shoulders, as if for the first time he was truly free. In that moment, he realized that vengeance was not his path, redemption was. And that was the moment Louis Zamperini won his greatest battle of all. The power of letting go, forgiveness as the ultimate strength. Forgiveness is not weakness. It is the hardest thing a man can do. It is the final test of true power. It is the only way to break the cycle of suffering. It is easy to hit back. It is hard to walk away. It is easy to hold on to rage. It is hard to let it die. It is easy to let suffering define you. It is hard to take that suffering and forge it into something great. But Zamperini did what most men could not do. He did not just survive, he transcended. The return to Japan, facing his demons one last time. In 1950, he returned to Japan, not as a victim, but as a man reborn. He met with the very guards who had once tortured him. He looked into the eyes of the men who had tried to break him, and then he forgave them. He shook their hands. He released every ounce of hate he had once carried. He proved to his captors that they had never truly owned him, because real power is in choosing how he would live his life. But there was one man missing. The bird had disappeared, vanished into hiding after the war, evading justice while countless other war criminals faced trial. But unlike them, he managed to escape punishment, reinventing himself in post-war Japan, transforming from a sadistic prison guard to a wealthy businessman. He built a comfortable life for himself, living in luxury, far from the blood-stained camps where he had once ruled through terror. Yet despite his riches, despite his reinvention, he remained a coward. When Zamperini returned to Japan, willing to meet face to face, not with vengeance but with forgiveness, the bird refused. He hid, refusing to acknowledge the man he had tried so desperately to break. His wealth, his status, his mansion, none of it could erase his own fear of the man who endured everything he had inflicted and still walked away victorious. And maybe that is the final lesson. Some enemies will never face you, some wounds will never be acknowledged, but you do not need their apology to move forward. You only need to decide that their power over you is over. Zamperini walked away. Not as a victim, not as a survivor, but as a man who had won his final war. A life defined by strength. He spent the rest of his life helping others overcome suffering. He became a speaker, an advocate, a living symbol of what it means to endure. He proved that true victory is not just surviving, but rising above. Most men carry their suffering forever. Zamperini let it go. Most men seek revenge. Zamperini chose power through peace. Most men define themselves by what was done to them. Zamperini defined himself by what he became. This is his final lesson. You are not what happened to you. You are what you do next. The Unbreakable Mind Trial. The War Against Weakness. This trial is designed to test your endurance, not just physical, but mental. You will go through controlled suffering, designed to strip away false limits. You will enter a state of absolute exhaustion, where your mind begs for relief. You will reach a point where most men would quit, and then you will push past it. This is the war against your own mind. You will either break or you will forge something new. By the end of this trial, your nervous system will have adapted to stress, hardship, and deprivation. Phase 1, the physical collapse barrier. Morning, first 6 hours. The first phase will push your body into complete exhaustion. The endurance gauntlet. You will run, row, rock, or cycle for a distance or duration longer than you have ever gone before. Whatever time or distance you went in previous trials, such as that of Robert Crisp, you will extend it this time. It does not matter how fast, it does not matter how efficient. It only matters that you do not stop and you give 100%. If you stop, you restart. If you fail, you try again. You will keep moving until there is no option left but forward. Static endurance, the holding trial. You will hold a weight, an object, or a body weight position for an extended period, longer than you think is possible. Your body will shake, your arms will burn, and your mind will beg to drop it, but you will not let go. Zamperini stood holding objects for hours under enemy beatings. You will prove that you can stand under your own mind's defiance. The no sitting, no resting rule. For the first 6 hours, you will not sit down. You will either move, stand, or remain in a hold. Comfort is a lie. Strength is forged in discomfort. Phase 2, the war against hunger and isolation. the afternoon, hours 6 to 18. Now your body will weaken, but your mind will harden. Fasting endurance, the hunger war. For the next 12 hours, you will eat nothing. Your body will demand fuel. Your stomach will demand relief. You will reject every urge to break. Zamperini went weeks without food in captivity. You will prove that you can go one day. The isolation trial, silence versus the mind. You will remove all external stimulation. No phone, no music, no distractions. You will sit alone with nothing but your thoughts. Most men panic when left alone with their own mind, but you have learned to master it. The weak need distractions. The strong dominate in their own minds. Again, you will take an ice bath or prolonged exposure to cold temperatures. No shivering, no panic, only control. This will further cement NPY expansion. Your body will produce massive amounts of neuropeptide Y, rewiring your ability to stay composed under extreme stress. BDNF spike. Your brain will strengthen its resilience pathways, ensuring you do not mentally collapse under pressure. And DHEA dominance. Your ability to process suffering and turn it into focus will be permanently enhanced. This is not just a test. This is a crucible. If you cannot master discomfort, you cannot master yourself. Phase 3, the final test, the transcendence threshold, the final 6 hours. Now you will prove that suffering has no power over you. The impossible task. You will choose one physical challenge or project you've been putting off that seems impossible in your current state, but you will complete it anyway. Zamperini did not quit, and neither will you. Destroy the weakness list. You will write down every excuse, every failure, and every moment of self-doubt. Then you will burn or tear it apart because that version of you no longer exists. The final oath, the unbreakable man's creed. You will speak aloud. Pain is my teacher. Fear is my adversary. Weakness is my enemy. I do not surrender. I do not kneel. I do not break. The past does not own me. Suffering does not define me. I am stronger than my pain, greater than my fear, and beyond my limits. I am unbreakable. Your body will remember this moment. Your mind will register this as your new standard. The completion of the trial, a mind that cannot be shaken. By the time this trial ends, you will have destroyed every comfort-dependent weakness inside of you. You will have learned to endure physical suffering without panic, without breakdown, and without excuse. You will have taught your brain to adapt to hardship, discomfort, and stress without surrender. And you've become a man who does not fear exhaustion, hunger, silence, or suffering. Most men are prisoners of their own mind. Most men are owned by their own fears. Most men will never understand what it means to be free. Zamperini won his final battle by choosing to be free, no matter what had been done to him. Now you have done the same. The final question, are you ready? If you cannot command your own mind, you are already enslaved. This trial is not a suggestion, it is a necessity. If you are too weak to do it, then you need it more than anyone. Either you prove yourself unbreakable or you remain shackled. Your choice. Chapter 7. Adrien Carton de Wiart, the man who could not be killed. Most men fear injury, pain, or death. Most men believe that the body has limits. Most men do not understand what true perseverance looks like. Adrien Carton de Wiart was not those men. He was shot in the face, stomach, ankle, hip, leg, ear, and head, but he kept fighting. He lost an eye, lost a hand, lost parts of his body, but he kept fighting. He survived plane crashes, captivity, multiple wars, but kept fighting. He was not a soldier, he was a living embodiment of war. He was not a survivor, he was a force that could not be killed. Some men live in fear. De Wiart lived in battle. The early years, a man born for war. Born into aristocracy in Belgium in 1880, De Wiart had every reason to live a comfortable life. Educated at Oxford, he was expected to follow a path of politics, wealth, and power. But none of it interested him. All he wanted was war. In 1899, as a teenager, he dropped out of Oxford and volunteered for the British Army. Too young to enlist, he simply lied about his age. He wanted war, and nothing would stop him. When the Second Boer War broke out in South Africa, he was sent to the front lines. And then his legend began. The first taste of death, shot in the face and left for dead. Most men do not survive being shot in the face. De Vuillard did. During combat, a bullet tore through his eye and skull, knocking him out of battle. He was left for dead, expected to succumb to his wounds. Instead, he survived. He was evacuated and began his recovery. When most men would retire, he fought to return. When most men would take their wounds as a warning, he saw them as a badge of honor. He did not care that he had lost an eye. He only cared about getting back into the front lines. And so, despite the injury, he went back to war. World War I, the man who refused to die. If De Vuillard had just fought in the Boer War, his legend would already be solid. But that was just the beginning. When World War I erupted, he joined the British Army again, determined to fight. He was sent to the trenches, where he would lead from the front, always at the center of battle. Bullets, shells, and explosions tore apart everything around him, but it never finished him off. He was shot in the head, but he kept fighting. He was shot in the leg, but he kept fighting. He was shot in the hip, but he kept fighting. His most gruesome injury came when his hand was completely destroyed by shrapnel. The doctors wanted to amputate, but De Vuillard was too impatient. He ripped off his own mangled fingers with his teeth to speed up the process. His hand was later amputated, but it didn't matter. He returned to battle with a prosthetic. He adapted, he endured, he went back to war. Most men fear getting a paper cut. De Vuillard ripped off his own fingers and didn't flinch. World War II, the man who escaped a POW camp at 60 years old. By the time World War II began, De Vuillard was already a walking corpse that refused to stay dead. Despite his age, missing hand, missing eye, he was deployed to Norway to fight the Nazis. When his plane was shot down, he survived the crash, because of course he did. He was captured by Italian forces and sent to a high-security POW camp. But De Vuillard was not the type of man to stay locked up. Even at 60 years old, with one eye and one hand, he tried to escape multiple times. He eventually succeeded, digging his way out of captivity and fleeing across Italy. By the time he returned to Britain, he was already preparing for another war mission. Death had tried to claim him so many times, but he simply refused to acknowledge it. The indestructible warrior, a life that could not end. Most men, after surviving multiple wars, countless injuries, and near-death experiences, would take the hint and retire. De Vuillard did not. He continued serving in diplomatic roles, sent to China to negotiate military strategy. Even in old age, he remained unbreakable, his body destroyed, but his mind and willpower untouched. He finally retired to Ireland, where he lived out the rest of his days in peace. He had spent a lifetime in war. When peace finally came, he had earned it. Most men live their lives avoiding hardship. De Vuillard spent his life chasing it. Most men fear pain. De Vuillard barely acknowledged it. Most men would have given up after one injury. De Vuillard took bullet after bullet, wound after wound, and just kept going. He was the ultimate immutable man. The lesson of Adrien Carton de Vuillard: pain is a lie. Most pain is an illusion. Most limits are self-imposed. Most suffering is only as powerful as you allow it to be. De Vuillard was proof that the human body can endure far more than people believe. He was proof that even catastrophic injuries do not define a man. His willpower does. He was proof that true warriors do not die. They simply keep going until they decide to stop. Most men today quit when things get tough. De Vuillard never quit, no matter how hard life tried to kill him. And that is his final lesson to you. Pain is not an excuse. Injury is not an excuse. Fear is not an excuse. You either endure or you surrender. De Vuillard never surrendered. Pain is a lie trial. Pain is the great deceiver. It whispers that you are weak. It demands that you stop. It convinces you that suffering means something is wrong. But pain is not the enemy. Pain is not the barrier. Pain is a teacher. Most men spend their lives avoiding pain. Tlahuicole ran toward it. He made sure pain was irrelevant, and he turned pain into his ally. Every time he was shot, he stood back up. Every time he lost a piece of his body, he fought harder. Every time death tried to take him, he laughed in its face. But he knew the truth. Pain is a lie. Your body can endure more than you believe. Your mind can overcome more than you think possible. Your limits exist only because you have not yet pushed beyond them. This trial will teach you what Tlahuicole already knew. Pain is just a suggestion. You do not have to listen. Pain is just a threshold. You will step past it. And pain is nothing compared to the will of an immutable man. Now you will face the pain is a lie trial. You will break past the limits of pain tolerance. You will train your body to withstand impact, heat, and exhaustion without flinching. You will rewire your nervous system to see suffering as fuel, not failure. By the time this trial ends, your relationship with pain will be permanently changed. You will understand what Tlahuicole lived by. Pain is an illusion, and you are indestructible. Hot peppers and endorphin release, training the brain to override pain. Capsaicin exposure, neurological conditioning through spicy foods, the scientific basis. Capsaicin, the compound in hot peppers, stimulates pain receptors in the mouth and gut, but causes no actual tissue damage. In response, the brain releases massive amounts of endorphins and dopamine, similar to a runner's high or post-injury euphoria. Regular exposure increases pain tolerance by rewiring how the body responds to pain signals. How to implement. Start with moderate heat, like a jalapeno pepper, and work your way up to extreme levels, like a ghost pepper or Carolina Reaper. Do not drink milk or neutralize the heat. Ride the pain and embrace the body's natural response. Use meditation or breath control to sit in the suffering without flinching. The realization. You will learn that pain is just a signal, not an enemy. Your body is built to endure. It simply needs to be taught. Bone hardening. Chinese iron body training without damage. The systematic conditioning of the body to absorb impact without injury. The scientific basis. Repetitive, controlled striking stimulates osteoblast activity, increasing bone density over time. Pain receptors become desensitized as nerves adapt to the impact. If done correctly, it results in harder bones, stronger connective tissue, and higher impact tolerance without breaking down the body. How to implement. Shin and forearm conditioning. Repeated strikes against a sandbag or padded wooded surface. Fist conditioning, controlled punches into a sand-filled bag or lightly against a solid surface like a rock or brick. Recovery is key. After training, apply warm herbal compresses like dit de jiao or magnesium lotion to promote healing and prevent long-term damage. The realization. What was once painful becomes normal. What was once impossible becomes instinct. Your body becomes a weapon, and pain loses its power over you. The Extended Endurance Challenge, pushing beyond previous limits. Each time, it must be harder than the last. Its scientific basis. Progressive overload applies not just to muscles, but to pain thresholds itself. Each exposure to suffering should extend the previous limit, because adaptation is only triggered when the body is forced to respond. How to implement. If you've done a 12-hour ruck, now it's 18 hours or 24 hours. If you've done a 5-minute ice bath, now it's 10 minutes or 20 minutes. If you've done a 100 rep push-up challenge, now it's 200. If you've done 1,000, now it's 2,000. Realization. Suffering is just a number. Every time you raise it, your mind rewires itself to handle more. Breath control during pain, the Wim Hof amplifier. Learning to stay calm in the fire. Scientific basis. Controlled breathing manipulates CO2 tolerance, allowing you to stay relaxed during pain. The body releases adrenaline under forced breath holds. overriding pain responses. This method is used by extreme athletes, fighters, and even Tibetan monks walking barefoot on fire. How to implement. Before or during pain exposure, use deep nasal inhales and long, powerful exhales. During ice baths or endurance pain, focus only on the breath, tuning out the body's suffering. Apply it to bone conditioning or spicy food exposure to further override panic responses. The realization: your body does not control you. Your breath is the master switch of suffering. Final praxis: the pain is a lie trial. Phase 1, capsation conditioning. Eat the hottest pepper you can handle without reacting and without relief. Control your breathing and force your body to normalize the burning sensation. Phase 2, the bone hardening and controlled strikes. Light repetitive impact training on shins, forearms, or fists. Recovery with herbal or magnesium application. Train pain adaptation without permanent injury. Phase 3, the extended endurance challenge. Push the previous endurance limits, ruck, ice bath, or static hold, longer than before. It must be harder than the last trial. Progress is the law. Phase 4, breath mastery under pain. Apply Wim Hof, Tumo, or nasal breathing techniques during peak pain. Override panic and prove to yourself that suffering is only a mental construct. The final oath, the indifference to pain manifesto. Pain is an illusion. The body adapts. The mind conquers. I do not fear suffering because suffering is just a threshold waiting to be broken. I do not seek comfort because comfort is a prison. I am indestructible, not because I am unhurt, but because pain no longer matters. Chapter 8, Travis Pastrana and J.B. Mooney, Defying Pain to Pursue Passion. Some men pursue greatness within limits. Some men play it safe, staying within what is comfortable. Some men are willing to push, but only so far. Travis Pastrana and J.B. Mooney were not those men. For them, risk was the only path to mastery. For them, pain was the price of achieving the impossible. For them, there was no glory in safety, only in relentless pursuit of their purpose. Both men shattered their bodies in the process. Both men suffered injuries that would have ended any normal competitor. But both men ignored pain, fear, and failure, and rose to the pinnacle of their respective sports. Most men fear the fall. Pastrana and Mooney made falling part of the climb. Travis Pastrana, the relentless daredevil. Some men master one sport. Pastrana mastered them all. Motocross, rally racing, freestyle motocross, supercross, stock car racing, off-road truck racing. No one else in history has dominated so many disciplines of extreme sports at this level. He did not just win, he reinvented what was possible. He was the first rider to land a double backflip on a dirt bike. He invented tricks that were once thought impossible. And he competed in sports he had no experience in, but still won. Pastrana's career was not just about victory, it was about pushing limits where no one else dared to go. But this pursuit of greatness came at a cost. His body had been broken beyond recognition. The list of his injuries reads like a medical textbook, and yet every time he got hit to the ground, he got back up. For Pastrana, pain was just another challenge to overcome. A catalog of injuries: spinal injuries, dislocated spine, a severe injury that could have ended his career, multiple back surgeries, indicative of the repeated stress and trauma endured, knee damage, torn ACL, PCL, LCL, MCL, complete ligament tears in his left knee, 9 surgeries on his left knee, 6 on his right, reflecting the relentless impact on his joints. Fractures and breaks, broken tibia and fibula, major bones in the leg, critical for mobility. Broken left elbow, affecting arm function and strength. Broken wrists, multiple times, essential for handling and control in sports. Other significant injuries: separated shoulder 3 times, leading to instability and pain. dislocated spinal column, a potentially paralyzing injury, over 25 concussions, posing serious long-term health risks, internal bleeding, life-threatening and indicative of severe trauma. Despite these injuries, Pastrana's resolve remained unshaken. Each setback was met with fierce determination to return stronger, to push further, and to continue pursuing his passion. J.B. Mooney, the tenacious bull rider. Some men ride to compete. Mooney rode to prove he was the best. Most bull riders strategize, choosing bulls that give them the best chance of winning. Mooney sought out the hardest bulls on purpose. He wasn't interested in easy victories. He wasn't content with the championship that came from playing it safe. If he couldn't ride the rankest bulls in the world, he didn't deserve to be at the top. He was a man who actively pursued the toughest road possible, because anything else was beneath him. And in doing so, he became a legend. He rode the nearly unrideable bull Bushwhacker, one of the greatest bulls in PBR history. He won 2 PBR World Championships through sheer grit and refusal to take the easy path. And he took on bulls that no one else wanted, and won. But this level of determination came at a cost. He shattered nearly every bone in his body. He suffered brutal concussions, and he had injuries that would have ended other careers, but he refused to quit. Like Pastrana, he understood one simple truth: pain is temporary, but greatness lasts forever. A chronicle of injuries, skeletal fractures, broken ribs, broken jaw, both sides, broken eye socket, broken legs, broken feet, joint and ligament damage, separated shoulder, blown out knees, internal injuries, lacerated liver, bruised kidneys and spleen, head and facial trauma, missing teeth, broken neck. This was a career-ending injury even for Mooney, leading to his retirement in 2023. Each injury told a story of a man pushing the limits of physical endurance. Mooney's ability to confront pain, recover, and return to the sport exemplifies a commitment that transcends fear. Embracing pain, defying fear. For both Pastrana and Mooney, pain was not a deterrent, but a companion on their journey. Their injuries, while severe, were milestones on a path to mastery and fulfillment. Lessons in overcoming fear and pain. Redefining limits. Mental fortitude. Understanding that pain is temporary, but quitting lasts forever. Adaptation. Learning from injuries to come back stronger and wiser. Passion over pain. Purpose-driven life. Their love for their respective sports outweighed the fear of injury. Inspiration through action. Demonstrating that true passion involves risk, but the rewards are immeasurable. Resilience in recovery. Commitment to rehabilitation. Investing time and effort to heal properly. And continuous improvement, using setbacks as set-ups for comebacks. The immutable lesson: pain and fear are just obstacles to overcome. Most men live in fear of pain, injury, and failure. Pastrana and Mooney knew those were just excuses. If you are afraid of getting hurt, you will never push past your limits. If you are afraid of failure, you will never take the risks required to win. If you let panic dictate your path, you will never know what you are truly capable of. Pastrana was willing to break every bone in his body to master extreme sports, and Mooney was willing to risk his life and limb to be the best bull rider on earth. Their legacy is clear. Most men are content with comfort. These men sought conquest of their dreams and passions. Pain is inevitable. Suffering is optional. Fear is a natural response, but courage is a choice. If you are not willing to take the risks, you do not deserve the rewards. Injury may pause the journey, only quitting ends it. The Fearless Pursuit Trial, breaking the chains of fear. Most men are prisoners, not of iron bars, but of their own fear. Not of physical walls, but of their own hesitation. Not of external forces, but of the voice inside that whispers, "What if I fail?" Most men avoid risk. Pastrana and Mooney ran toward it. They knew truth that separates great from average. Greatness is never achieved without risk. Every barrier is a mental illusion. Fear is not real, it is a choice. This trial will strip away hesitation, annihilate self-imposed limits, and force you to step beyond fear into total dominance. Phase 1, breaking the mental lock, the fear exposure exercise. You will do something you have feared for years. Every man has a fear that keeps him shackled, a challenge he has avoided, an action he has postponed, something that represents the walls of his mental prison. Your first task, identify it. What have you been avoiding because it scares you? What risk have you made excuses to avoid? What is the one action that, if taken, would shatter the illusion of fear? It might be public speaking, asking for a promotion, or confrontation of a fear that has dominated your life. It might be putting yourself out there in a way that you could be judged. It might be confronting a personal demon head on. Whatever it is, you will do it. No delays, no excuses, only actions. If you do not confront this fear, you are choosing mediocrity. Phase 2, physical risk without a safety net, the controlled danger trial. You will do something physically challenging that carries real risk. Pastrana risked his life with every trick. Mooney risked his body every time he got on the bull. If you never risk anything, you will never grow. This must be an activity where failure is possible, where fear must be faced directly. It might be skydiving or bungee jumping. It might be climbing something high. It might be entering a physical competition where you might lose. You will face the moment where your body hesitates and your mind must push forward. You will force yourself to act before fear has the time to convince you otherwise. You will come out knowing that fear is nothing but a liar. This will change you forever. Phase 3, the no return commitment, risking something that matters. You will commit to something that forces you to grow, with no way to back out. It might be signing up for a competition. It might be investing in a life-changing project. And it might be putting yourself into the arena where failure is possible, but success is transformational. Pastrana did not know if he would land the first double backflip, but he tried anyway. Mooney did not know if he would survive bushwhacker, but he rode it anyway. You will now take a leap into the unknown. No plan B, no safety net, no escape. Once you step in, you will either rise or fall, but you will never stay the same. Fear will try to stop you. Ignore it. Phase 4, the fear elimination ritual, writing your own death sentence. You will acknowledge the worst possible outcome and accept it. Fear thrives on uncertainty. It whispers, "What if you fail?" and it keeps you shackled. You will kill that voice today. Write down the absolute worst thing that could happen if you take your risk. Face the disaster scenario and decide that you are okay with it. Once you have accepted the worst, you have nothing left to fear. You have learned that there is nothing to fear but fear itself. You might lose money, you might get embarrassed, and you might get hurt, but it does not matter. Fear dies when you remove its power over you. When you no longer fear failure, you have become unstoppable. The final step, the fearless oath. Now you will make a vow that will define the rest of your life. Read this aloud and mean every word. I will not be ruled by fear. I will not be held back by my hesitation. I will not allow weakness to dictate my choices. I will act. I will risk. I will take the leap. If I fall, I will rise again. If I fail, I will learn. If I suffer, I will grow. I will live fully. I will never choose the coward's path. From this day forward, fear has no power over me. Now you are ready. You will not live a life dictated by fear. You will take risks. You will push limits. And you will embrace the uncertain. You will live as Pastrana and Mooney did, without hesitation. Completion of the Fearless Pursuit Trial. You will have now done something you were afraid of. You will have taken physical risks beyond comfort. You will have made a no-return commitment towards something bigger, and you will have learned to eliminate fear's grip on your life. Most men will never take this trial. That is why most men remain average. Now you stand among the fearless. From this moment on, nothing can hold you back. Chapter 9, Gonzalo Guerrero, the conquistador who became a Mayan. Most men cling to their past. Most men refuse to abandon the world that made them. Most men fear true transformation because it means killing who they once were. Gonzalo Guerrero did what few men in history have ever done. He betrayed his own empire. He abandoned his own life, and it became something greater. A Spanish soldier trained in the art of war, a captive dragged into the hands of foreign people, and a warrior reborn in the jungle, no longer a servant of a crown, but a master of his own fate. Most men fear losing themselves. Guerrero burned his past and walked forward without hesitation. From conquistador to captive, the fall of a soldier. Gonzalo Guerrero was not supposed to become a legend. He was just another Spanish explorer, setting sail in the New World in search of conquest. Like many before him, he believed that his empire was destined to rule. Like many before him, he believed that the natives were nothing but obstacles to be crushed. But fate had other plans. Gonzalo Guerrero set sail as a conquistador, a servant of the Spanish Empire, believing he was destined for conquest. He thought he would be a master of a new world, a man of civilization standing above the so-called savages. He trained for war, but he never trained for what would come next. The sea betrayed them at first. A storm ripped through the ocean, tossing his ship like a child's toy. The waves consumed wood and steel, swallowing men whole. The survivors clung to the wreckage, battered and broken, as the waters dragged them toward the unknown shore. The Yucatan Peninsula, the land of the Maya, a civilization older than Spain itself. They did not welcome the strangers. They seized them. Guerrero and his men were bound, beaten, and dragged into captivity. His empire did not exist there. His weapons were useless. His rank meant nothing. And then, one by one, his fellow Spaniards began to die. Some were taken to the temples, laid upon altars of stone, their chests torn open, their hearts ripped from their bodies. Some were sacrificed in ritual bloodlettings, their deaths honoring gods whose names they had never heard. Some were worked to death in chains, their once proud European bodies reduced to exhausted husks in the relentless jungle heat. The Maya did not see them as superior, they saw them as offerings. Guerrero should have died alongside them, but something kept him alive. Maybe it was fate, maybe it was luck, maybe it was because he was too strong and too stubborn to die. Whatever the reason, he was spared, but survival came at a cost. He was stripped of his power, he was made a prisoner, a slave. The proud conquistador was now at the mercy of those he had once seen as lesser. Most men would have broken. They would have cursed to the gods, cursed the land, and cursed their own misfortune. They would have clung to their past, refusing to accept their new reality. They would have waited for rescue, praying for the return of the Spanish brethren. Guerrero did none of those things. He did not wait, he did not beg, and he did not break. Instead, he did something no other conquistador would have done. He adapted. He did not just survive, he transformed. And in doing so, he became something greater than any empire could have ever made him. The rebirth, becoming one with the savage world. Guerrero did not just survive among the Maya, he became one of them. He abandoned his Spanish armor, covering himself in tattoos and piercings. He learned their ways, their strategies, and their warfare. He married a Maya woman and had children, the first known mestizo family of the Americas. He was no longer a Spaniard. He was no longer a conquistador. He had become something new, something untamed, something dangerous. The Spanish return. A warlord rises from the jungle. Years passed. Spain pushed deeper into the New World, their hunger for conquest unrelenting. They burned villages. They shattered temples. They enslaved entire populations. They declared themselves the rightful rulers of the land they had barely begun to understand. They saw themselves as gods amongst savages, men destined to bring civilization to the untamed wilderness. But the jungle had its own gods, and among them was a man they had once called their own. When the Spanish forces marched inland, they expected submission. They expected the Maya to scatter before the steel and gunpowder. They expected to reclaim their long-lost countryman, Gonzalo Guerrero, the one they had believed was still a prisoner waiting to be rescued. What they found instead was a warlord standing at the head of the Mayan army. His body was covered in ritual tattoos, his face pierced with bone and jade. He no longer spoke the Spanish of his youth. His tongue now belonged to the land that had remade him. His armor was gone, replaced by the garb of a warrior chief, a leader of men who had once been his enemies. He did not need to be saved. He did not want to be saved, because he was not the man they had lost. He was something new, something Spain could never control. The conquistadors called out to him. They reminded him of his homeland, his Spanish blood, of the Christian God that had once ruled his heart. They told him he was one of them, that he could still return, that he could be forgiven. They begged him to renounce the savages and rejoin the empire. But Guerrero was no longer Spanish. He did not hesitate, he did not flinch, and he did not look back. He had not just embraced the jungle, he had made it his weapon. He had not just adapted to the new world, he had mastered it. And he had not just abandoned his old life, he had killed it. He stood against Spain, against his former people, and against everything he had once known, because he understood a truth that no other conquistador could comprehend. Freedom is not found in the world of kings and crowns. It is seized by those willing to burn their past and forge something new. Most men cling to their chains because they are afraid of the unknown. Guerrero shattered his chains and stepped into the fire of transformation without fear. He did what no other man had the courage to do. He rejected his empire. He rejected the lie of civilization. And he rejected every comfort that had once made him weak. He chose true freedom over familiarity. The immutable lesson: true freedom requires sacrifice. Most men want to change, but refuse to let go of their past. Guerrero did not hesitate. He let go of his empire. He let go of his old identity. And he let go of everything that tied him to a lesser existence. He became something greater because he was willing to burn what he once was. Most men fear true transformation because it means leaving behind what is comfortable. Guerrero understood that comfort, familiarity, and complacency is the enemy of evolution. Most men want freedom but refuse to pay its price. Guerrero understood that to be free, one must be willing to kill the man they once were. And this is his final lesson. To be truly free, you must destroy every chain that ties you to weakness. To become something greater, you must be willing to sacrifice everything that holds you back. True transformation is not an easy path. It is a ruthless war against your own past. The death of the old self trial. Now you will engage in a trial designed to kill your old self and forge something new. You will break the chains that once tied you to your past weaknesses. You will embrace discomfort, unfamiliarity, and the unknown. You will walk away from this trial no longer the same man. Death of the old self trial, the ultimate transformation. Most men want to change. Few are willing to destroy the version of themselves that holds them back. Most men cling to the familiar. Few are willing to walk into the unknown with nothing but their will. Gonzalo Guerrero did not hesitate. He did not look back. He killed the man he once was and became something greater. Now you will do the same. This trial is designed to strip away every last piece of your old identity that keeps you weak, hesitant, and bound to the past. You will kill the outdated version of yourself. You will step into the unknown, and you will emerge something stronger, untamed, and unstoppable. Phase 1, the burn, destroying your old identity. You will erase the weak version of yourself, physically, symbolically, and mentally. Step 1, write down the death list. Write down everything about yourself that must die. Weaknesses, excuses, habits that keep you chained, fears that hold you back, the identity that no longer serves you. This list is the obituary of the man you will no longer be. Step 2, the fire ritual. Burn the list, rip it to pieces, destroy it with your bare hands. Watch it turn to ash, knowing that version of you no longer exists. You have now severed your past. Phase 2, the severance, walking into the unknown. You will step into unfamiliar territory, where transformation is the only option. Step 1, abandon comfort for 48 hours. You will leave behind your daily routine and force yourself into something new. No familiar habits, no distraction, and no safety nets. Sleep somewhere different. Go where you have never been before. Strip yourself of everything that ties you to your current identity. Step 2, total isolation for at least 24 hours. No phone, no contact, no distractions. Just you and the new version of yourself taking shape. This is the moment where true rebirth begins. Phase 3, the rite of rebirth, becoming the savage. Now you will prove that you are no longer the man you once were. Step 1, do something you would have never done before, a risk you've always feared taking, a test of self-reliance where no one can help you. Whatever it is, you must do something that terrifies you. You will declare a new name. This is not a literal name. This is the name of the new force you have become. You will write down a single word that defines the man you are now. This word will be your guiding fire from now on. You are no longer who you were. You are something else, something untamed, something that cannot be stopped. The final step, the oath of severance. Now you will speak the words that finalize your transformation. Read this aloud and mean every word. The man I once was is dead. I do not fear the unknown. I embrace it. I do not cling to my past. I destroy it. I am not shackled by weakness. I break it. I have burned my old self, and I have stepped into the fire of transformation. I am not the same man, and I never will be again. Now you are reborn. Now you are free. Completion of the death of the old self trial. You have erased the weak version of yourself. You have severed comfort, hesitation, and familiarity. You have forced yourself into transformation. You are no longer who you once were. Most men fear letting go. You just did what they never will. Most men dream of transformation. You just lived it. From this moment on, the past does not own you. The world does not own you. You own yourself. Chapter 10, Peter Freuchen and Ernest Shackleton, the masters of ice and death. Most men fear the cold. Freuchen and Shackleton embraced it. Most men break when forced with impossible odds. They did not break. They bent nature to their will. One was an Arctic explorer who amputated his toes to survive. The other was an Antarctic leader who defied death to save his men. Both men stood at the edge of existence and refused to be erased. This is the story of the two men who mastered the unforgiving world and became legends. Peter Freuchen, the 6'7" giant who laughed at death. The Arctic is a graveyard for the unprepared. Freuchen did not just survive it, he conquered it. Born in Denmark in 1886, he abandoned comfort for the raw, unforgiving world of the North. He lived among the Inuit, learning their survival tactics and adopting their resilience. He faced starvation, frostbite, and storms that could kill in minutes, but he never yielded. But his greatest test came when nature itself tried to bury him alive. The Ice Tomb, a man versus death. A blizzard came, swallowing the landscape in a white abyss. Freuchen, alone and miles from safety, was trapped under an avalanche of ice and snow. The weight of the ice crushed his body, pinning him in place. There was no food, no warmth, no way to escape. Most men would have closed their eyes and waited for death. But Freuchen did not wait. He fought. With nothing but his bare hands, he carved through the ice. When his hands failed, he used his teeth, gnawing away at the frozen wall. He fashioned a makeshift tool from his own frozen excrement, turning his body into a weapon. After hours of clawing, biting, and sheer defiance, he broke free. His legs were frozen, blackened with frostbite. The doctors wanted to amputate his foot, but he refused. Instead, he took a knife and amputated his own toes, piece by piece, with no anesthesia, because death would have to work harder to take him. Ernest Shackleton, the man who led his men out of hell. A born explorer, Shackleton set out for Antarctica, leading the Imperial Trans-Antarctic Expedition in 1914. He was chasing a dream to cross the entire frozen continent, but the ice had other plans. His ship, the Endurance, became trapped in the Antarctic pack ice. For months they waited, hoping the ice would release them. Instead, the ship was crushed, leaving them stranded in one of the most desolate places on Earth. Most men would give up, but Shackleton did not. With no way to escape, he led his men across ice on foot. He rationed food, maintained morale, and refused to let despair take hold. When all hope seemed lost, he made a decision. He would go for help, no matter the cost. With 5 men, he sailed a tiny lifeboat across 800 miles of the deadliest ocean on Earth. They faced waves the size of mountains, freezing rain, and starvation, but they made it. And when he reached civilization, he returned for his men. Not a single man was lost, not one of them perished, because Shackleton refused to let the ice claim them. A leader does not abandon his men. A warrior does not surrender to the cold. The immutable lesson: survival is a mindset, not luck. Freuchen should have died, but he made tools from nothing and refused to quit. Shackleton should have lost his men, but his unbreakable leadership saved them all. Both men stood at the edge of death, but death did not take them, because they did not let it. Most men are ruled by their environment. Freuchen and Shackleton ruled out the environment itself. Most men say the impossible and accept defeat. These men saw the impossible and shattered it. Your final reckoning: the survival of the savage trial. This is it. This is the final trial, the moment where everything else before has led. This is not a game. This is not a challenge. This is war. For 24 hours, you will walk the path of Freuchen and Shackleton. You will endure. You will overcome. And when you emerge, you will not be the same man. Most men talk about resilience. You will live it. Most men fantasize about strength. You will prove it. This is the final transformation, the point of no return. If you complete this, you will never look at hardship the same way again. The trial: you will be alone. You will be stripped of comfort. You will be hungry, tired, and burdened. You will rely only on your mind, your body, and the raw will to keep moving. This is the test of absolute endurance, resilience, and self-reliance. The weak will fail. The immutable will rise. Phase 1, the severance: cutting yourself off from the world. Before you begin, you must eliminate all distractions. No phone, no music, no internet, no contact. For 24 hours, you do not exist to the world. You are now alone in the wilderness of existence. Find a place you will not be disturbed: nature, forest, desert, or even an urban environment if necessary. You will be utterly self-reliant. No outside help, no crutches, no conveniences. You will move through the world as Freuchen and Shackleton did, unsupported, untethered, and free. From this moment, you are on your own. Phase 2, the endless march, a journey with no mercy. You will travel on foot for no less than 15 to 20 miles. You will carry a heavy pack, simulating the burden of survival gear. You will walk on varied terrain, challenging your balance, endurance, and pain threshold. For as long as possible, you will go barefoot, reconnecting with the primal state of man. You will test your willpower. Every mile will demand more from you. You will push through discomfort. You will ignore exhaustion, and you will silence every voice that tells you to stop. You will move forward no matter what. Phase 3, the trial of the starving mind. For the next 24 hours, you will consume no food. Your body will beg for sustenance. You will give it nothing. You will learn to command hunger, not be ruled by it. If you absolutely must eat, you must procure it yourself. Find wild food or forage for it somehow, just as Freuchen and Shackleton did. Only if you absolutely earn it will you eat it. You will not be saved. You will save yourself. Phase 4, the abyss of isolation. At nightfall, you will be completely alone. No fire unless you build it yourself. No shelter unless you create it. No comfort, only the void. You will stare back into the abyss just as they did. Freuchen in the Arctic, buried under snow, alone against the elements. Shackleton in the Antarctic, staring into the frozen nothingness, refusing to give in. Now it's your turn. For hours, you will sit in absolute solitude, hearing nothing but your own breath. Your mind will scream for distraction. You will give it none. Your body will beg for rest. You will resist. You will learn what it means to truly be alone and unshaken. By the end of the night, you will understand something that most men never will. You do not need the world. You do not need safety. You do not need comfort. You only need yourself. The final threshold, the last march. When dawn breaks, you are not done. You will rise before the sun and continue the march. Exhausted, starving, and battered, you will push forward. One final journey, proving that you have conquered weakness, doubt, and fear. You have survived the abyss. Now you finish as a different man. No matter how far you must go, you will complete it. You will not limp. You will not hesitate. You will move with strength. Because you are no longer the man who began this trial. The final step, the savage oath. Now you will seal the transformation. Read this aloud and mean every word. I have walked through the fire. I have endured hunger, pain, and solitude. I have shattered every excuse. I have no more fears, no more limitations, no more chains. The world did not break me. I broke the world's hold on me. From this moment, I am untouchable. I am savage. I am immutable. Now you are complete. The completion of the survival of the savage trial. You have endured 24 hours of absolute self-reliance. You have traveled across vast distances under the strain of hunger. You have confronted complete isolation and came out stronger. You have proven that you are not like other men. Most men will not face something like this. This is why most men are forgettable. You have crossed the final threshold. From this moment on, nothing in the world can shake you. Conclusion. The immutable reckoning. Most men live in chains. Chains of comfort, chains of hesitation, chains of fear. They are ruled by what ifs and what comes next. They do not push. They do not break barriers. They do not truly live. But you have seen the truth. Pain does not matter. Fear is an illusion. Weakness is a choice. You have walked through the fire of the immutable men. You have learned from warriors who refuse to bow. You have seen men suffer beyond imagination and never break. You have watched them carve their own path, no matter the cost. The immutable truth. Tlahuicole chose death over submission. Bronson and Shaw refused to be tamed. Zamperini was broken in body, but never in mind. De Wiart fought beyond the limits of human endurance. Pastrana and Mooney defied pain to pursue purpose. Guerrero burned his past to become something greater. Freuchen and Shackleton defied nature itself, mastering the cold and surviving the impossible. They are the blueprint, but only you can build yourself into the man you must become. Your final trial, the Immutable Audit. Every day you will face a choice. Bow or fight, kneel or stand, surrender or persist. This is the reckoning, the war of the will, the moment of truth. Every morning you will perform the immutable audit. You will look at your past sufferings and own them. You will shine a brutal light on your weaknesses, exposing every excuse. You will craft your next move, not for comfort, but for growth. This is your daily war against stagnation. Every weakness will be destroyed, every excuse will be eliminated, and every fear will be confronted. Every day you will prove that you are truly immutable. Most men will never walk this path. This is why most men do not matter. But you are no longer most men. You have crossed the threshold. You have faced the fire. And now, the only way is forward. Be relentless. Be untamed. Be immutable.